Hello, not sure if you can hear us, but we can't hear anything out here on Teams. If it could be unmuted, that would be great.
Any juice? Ah, look at that. All right. Good morning, everyone. Renee Baumstark. I'm with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission at the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. I co-chair FCMaP with Cheryl and the rest of the team. Ashley, welcome. I'm going to bring the mic around. You know what? I think we can just hand it back and forth.
Hi, everybody. Guess who I am? So Cheryl Hapke. I'm the chair of the FCMaP Science and Technical Advisory Council. I'm one of the co-founders of the program, and I'm also a research professor over at USF College of Marine Science. Welcome. And I just also wanted to say the person who was speaking before is our faithful program coordinator, fabulous, faithful program coordinator, Christy Erickson. So if you hadn't met her before, that's Christy, and she rocks.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, actually.
Yeah, that's afternoon.
Starting at afternoon. Ashley Chappell, NOAA, Integrated Ocean and Coastal Mapping, and an early and consistent supporter of FCMaP.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Creech with David Evans and Associates. Sorry.
Hey everyone, Brian Connon, VP Ocean Mapping at Saildrone and President of the Hydrographic Society of America.
Hello, everyone. Rick Cole, manager of Med Ocean Consulting Company called RDC International. Actually the co-chair of the Florida section of the Marine Technology Society. We're here sponsoring this meeting and we appreciate the opportunity. And it's good to see those of you that I know.
Sure, yeah. Hey, how's it going? Zach Westfall, Pinellas County Coastal Management.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Flox. I'm a geologist at the USGS right across the street.
Nancy DeWitt, geologist, also USGS operations, primarily for bathymetry mapping, processing, et cetera.
Chris Bamelman's also with USGS.
Chelsea Stock, USGS as well.
Alex Seymour and USGS, you guessed it, across the street.
I'm Tom Murphy with Wolpert in Miami.
Rick Householder, Geospatial Program Director with Wolpert, not in Miami, West Palm Beach. I would have done it.
No, we got him. We got him.
Katie Wallace. I'm the Data Monitoring Program Coordinator for the Gulf of Mexico Alliance.
Anna Braswell, University of Florida and Florida Sea Grant.
Good afternoon, Stefan O'Brien with the Center for Ocean Mapping and Innovative Technologies at USF.
Jin Chen from USF College of Marine Science.
Malcolm Elliott, Fugro, RAMS Project Manager.
Eric Anderson, Seymour Mapping.
Rachel Bobick, RMB Geo and trustee of the Hydrographic Society.
Dave Neff, Maritime Director at Wolpert.
Matt Cushing with USGS.
Jeff Andrews with Aptum.
Thomas Shahan with Aptum.
Patrick Bryce with Aptum.
Jeff Danielson with USGS Aeros.
Good afternoon, Steve Morosky from the University of South Florida College of Marine Science.
Dave Cohan from FWC, FWRI.
Luke McEachran with FWC.
Cheryl Gilbert with USF College of Marine Science and the Center for Ocean Mapping and Innovative Technologies.
Dr. Joe Dahm, I'm with Tampa Deep Sea Explorers, and our CEO, Ed Larson, is running a little late, but he will be here shortly too.
Luke Thema with Sarasota County Government.
James Lawrence with Dewberry.
Amarne Gandhi with Dewberry.
Jennifer Wozencraft with the Corps of Engineers Joint Airborne LiDAR Bathymetry Technical Center of Expertise.
Emily Clipp with Dewberry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Digna Rueda from here from the College of Marine Science, from the Laboratory of Remote Sensing, directed by Frank Mueller-Carger.
Alexa Ramirez with NB5 Geospatial.
James Willey with ME5 Geospatial.
Thank you. Are you back?
The clicker doesn't like the distance from the table to the podium. So the presenters are going to have to, at this point, until we can maybe check with another one. We've had two of them in here today. And I'll have to just scroll through for you. Okay. Is this working okay? Yes, very much so. All right, this is fun. I'm just amazed. We've just come so far. We've come such a long way since those very early days. Just to we have a little bit of time. I'm not going to talk forever, but just anecdotally, I just remember the very first stakeholder workshop that we held to do the prioritization. So the first prioritization was up in the Big Bend region. It was in Cedar Key, and the then co-chair of the of FCMaP, which was Phil Kramer, was with FIO at the time. He said, "I'll take care of lunch. I'll handle lunch." So he was running late, and when he got there was probably only 30 people or so there. You remember that? He couldn't find anything in Cedar Key to pick up for lunch, so he had walked in with a loaf of bread and a bunch of cold cuts, and everybody made their own sandwich. And now we've got these great sponsors, and we're hosting the mixers, and we have lunches or breakfasts, and anyway, so it's just kind of funny to see how far we've come, and it's just fantastic. So thanks to all you for your support over the years, because it's been you that is the reason why we're here. As if you didn't need a reminder, I didn't want to go through what is FCMaP yet another time. We've spent the years doing that, but just a reminder of sort of what our mission statement is. And the whole idea here is that we don't want to do mapping ourselves. We want to coordinate it. We want to make sure that anyone doing any kind of mapping as well, especially bathymetry, is what we're tracking in the state of Florida, that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So there's not redundancy. So there's opportunities to expand perhaps a footprint if other people have funding and that sort of thing. And then, of course, we really got a massive infusion when the Florida Seafloor Mapping Initiative was passed, and there's $100 million for mapping Florida's coastal waters out there. So that you're going to hear over this next couple days all about where that mapping is and how that's all going. But what I'm really standing up here right now to talk about is we decided that because FCMaP, the first prioritization was 0 to 200 meters water depth, right? It was like, okay, anywhere map, tell us what your priorities are. Once it was clear that the Florida Seafloor Mapping Initiative was going to fund and establish contracts for just the 0 to 20 meters to begin with, right? They were going to focus on that. They were going to spend funds to collect that shallower water. We thought, it might be good because the first priority, as I'll show you, the first prioritization definitely had the majority, the highest priorities were in that 0 to 20 meter water depth. So I think go ahead and go to next slide. And this shows you that first prioritization. I guess we don't have a pointer either. Pointer? Okay. So the map in the middle looks a little washed out to me. Maybe, well, maybe that map in the middle doesn't look washed out to you, but it does. Just kidding. Don't try asking for things in the middle of a talk. Okay. So as I was just saying now, if you look at where the deeper colors are, the oranges and the reds, the darker colors, that or the hotter colors, if you will, those are where the stakeholder prioritizations landed. And that actually drove the Florida Seafloor Mapping Initiative to say we're going to map in that 0 to 20 meter water depth to start with. Does that work? Huh. Okay. And then so we decided that because the result of that ended up focusing so much in the shallow water, and that's now being mapped, that we would redo a prioritization and just have it focus on the 20 to 200 meter water depth. So kind of get a reflection of now that we know that the shallow water is going to be mapped, what are people's priorities now? So next slide, please. And, we created the same way, similar to the first one, we created an online ArcGIS interface. We did outreach across to our whole list of stakeholders. But rather this time, and so we had 22 entities participate. I want to be clear that when I say entity, that doesn't mean a single person, right? An entity would be a representative from an agency, an institution, that kind of thing that would represent the voice of the many at their place, at their location. So it's bigger. Only 22 licenses were granted to the ArcGIS online, interactive software, but there was a lot more people having their say in the results of this. So rather than use the coin method, if those of you who participated in the 2019 prioritization, remember that for each region, we divided it into 10 by 10 square kilometer grid cells, and you were given so many coins and told to populate grid cells with your coins, but you were limited in the number of coins that you were given. So you had to really think carefully about what was your priority. This time, we just wanted to kind of do it easy, quick and dirty, easy for everybody. So we were just asking for a high, medium, and low rating, right? And you could fill in as many grid cells as you wanted or your entity wanted. And then, as we did in the first one, but we modified it a little bit, we were asking, besides showing us where your priorities are, we also wanted to know what your priorities are and what you use the data for, and what other types of data do you need in addition to that bathymetric data. Next slide. Keep going. That was just the grid cells. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so 2023 prioritization. This is the distribution of participants. You can see that for the most part, the federal government was very interested and heavy participation from the feds. And then what's really interesting, I thought, was that between the state governments, research, academic institutions, and local governments, each one of those was evenly split to make up the remaining. So that's actually good. So it shows a pretty strong showing there. So next. Okay, so there's a couple slides showing showing the results. This is now it's really hard to see. Wow, this is so washed out. Okay, the line that you see right here, this edge of this brilliant orange and yellow polygon, that is actually the 20 meter isobath. So it's sorry, I apologize. It's as washed out as it is. You can't see the coastline. But so this prioritization could only go out to 200 meters and 20 meters. It was limited to that. So if people gave it, and so these are some values, right? So If people gave it a high, it would get a ranking of 3, medium, and low. And so you can see that every grid cell in the entire area had some level of prioritization. But what we see here, and not really surprising, but I guess maybe I was a little bit, surprised to see that once again the highest priorities drop right in that shallower water zone or the deeper water zone, right? So more like in the 20 to 40 meters. So people are still interested for resources, navigation, everything in the shallower water. Not totally. I mean, you see these areas out here and kind of a big area right off of Tampa Bay. But again, for the most part, it hugs that close. It stays close to that 20-meter isobath. Okay, next. This is just a different way of looking at that prioritization that I think kind of makes it the results a little bit more intuitive. This is now showing only those cells that participants ranked high priority, right? So the last map you saw, every grid cell was populated with something. With this one, it's only if it was a high priority for someone. Obviously, if it was multiple people, that's where you get the really bright colors. And you can see, again, off of Tampa Bay is really important, kind of some areas up in the Panhandle, and all along the Keys are coming out as, again, in that kind of 20 to 40 meter water depth. And the colors and the number of respondents. After I finish this presentation, we'll answer some questions. We're going to do some breakout groups to further talk about these results, discuss them in smaller groups, figure out, did we miss something critical, and just explore what these outcomes are. And so for that, just get you thinking now, we're going to break out into East Coast, West Coast, and Keys. And I'll be moderating facilitating the West Coast. Christy will be moderating the East Coast, and Renee will be moderating the Keys, and we'll tell you where to go. But let me get through this. I think I'm close to done. Go ahead, Christy. Again, this is difficult because it's kind of hard to see. This projection is washed out, but so this is what you were just looking at. Okay, just another form, and then this blue polygon weirdness back behind the prioritization, and you can kind of see some of it's translucent through here. The blue polygon are gap areas in our 2024 gap analysis, which I'll be talking about more tomorrow, right? So if it's white, it's been mapped. So the light blue here is areas that have come out as a gap in the gap analysis, and you can see that a lot of those areas, like this big blob off of Tampa Bay, certainly regions up here, and also in certain areas in the Keys. Those are areas that have not been mapped that are still coming out as high priority. So we're hoping that when there's the second round of funding, not the second round of funding, but when mapping continues, whether it's through FSMI or other ways, that the focuses are, this can help drive where those areas are focused, because obviously, funds are limited. And you'll be seeing more of this, and there's also posters around. Okay, next. So I just want to run really quickly through the map products and justification criteria that we use. Christy, forward, please. We based these on the 3-dep prioritization. I'm looking at Ashley, is that right? Sorry, okay. Interagency working group for ocean and coastal mapping did a prioritization last year, I believe, 2 years ago. Two or 3 years ago. And we wanted to start, making sure that we kind of conformed more with what the national folks were doing on a national level. So we used their same categories. In hindsight, I think it might dilute the data a little bit given our smaller geography than the national, but it is what it is. And so I just wanted to put these up here. So again, we asked anybody who participated in the prioritization that they also tell us what data they mostly need and what they use it for. What are their applications or justifications? Next. So I just pulled, because there's so many categories, I just pulled the top 5 respondents And this is the justifications for mapping. So you can see, and again, I found this surprising, but it was good. We had really strong academic contribution this time around, more so than we had in the original prioritization. And you can see that scientific research came out as the highest justification for mapping. So that's good. I mean, federal agencies also use it for scientific research. Let's see, these are not too far apart, but the next one is, understanding habitats and natural areas, then modeling, which I assume is like hydrodynamic modeling or ocean circulation modeling. And then 16% are just water column explanation. And finally, coastal and marine natural hazards. So it's kind of the distribution of the top 5 of the mapping justifications. Go ahead, Christy. And again, washed out map, but this is the number of respondents in the justification for scientific research. So you can see, once again, just like the overall prioritization, the scientific research that people are interested in is focused in the shallow area of the 20 to 200 meter water depth. Next. And then the top 5 mapping products. And we're going to, at some point, we're going to write some sort of report or paper or something on this, and it'll be up on the FCMaP hub as well. Top 5 mapping products are elevation or bathymetry or topo. Second most in demand is backscatter, not surprising. Third is sub-bottom geologic characterization. I think besides scientific research, that really drives the hunt for beach sand for nourishment, right? So that requires sub-bottom information. And then biological, some type of sampling, and then magnometer. So you can kind of see that distribution of those mapping products. Go ahead. All right, now this purple one is the distribution of the top desired map product, elevation. And you can see there's a little bit of a deviation from, not too much, but a little bit of deviation from this as compared with the overall priority, high priority areas, in that you're still hugging kind of the edge of that shallower portion of the 20 to 200 meter zone. But there, for the most part, but there's some exceptions, especially out here on the West Florida shelf. There's fairly high priorities in much deeper waters. So that's definitely something needs to be paid attention to when the mapping begins in earnest. Go ahead. And then this is I just want to point out that the results side by side of this is the updated prioritization, and this was the original prioritization. So again, we had slightly different. We did it a little bit differently, divided it into regions, and people were limited on where they could place their coins or how many coins they got to place. But essentially, you see that bulk of really top high priorities came in the 0 to 20 meter water depth. That's being mapped thanks to FSMI. And so hopefully on the next rounds of mapping efforts, that will be focusing on the shallower portions of the deeper water zone, with the exception of these highly desirable areas on the West Florida. Next. Okay, just to summarize really quickly, we saw that federal agencies made up the highest percent of participants. We used a ranking method as opposed to a coin method that we used the first time around. Overall, highest priority, I'm kind of being really redundant here, but really came out to still be in that shallow water, that 20 to 40 meter water depth. Basically offshore extensions of the original prioritization. And finally, elevation and backscatter came out as the 2 highest needed mapping products, and scientific research was the highest justification, which is cool. So I think that's it. Yeah. Questions? Criticisms? Steve?
Cheryl, it's really exciting to see everybody's priorities assembled. It seems to me that the places that seem to be highest priority are pretty incremental. They're offshore of large population centers, and they're areas where we actually have some inkling of what's there. Yeah. And there's very little in this portfolio that I would call exploration. There's a lot of terra incognita there. And portfolio management would say, you want to have a little bit more risk reward kind of edge to this portfolio, that maybe even a transects through this unknown sea might be useful in terms of, turning up, that place where nobody ever looked before.
Right.
So I wonder if we get too locked down on, the coins and the squares, that we miss something that, is potentially a big payoff that nobody's ever surveyed because nobody was ever interested.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Well taken. Thank you. I think that the justification probably, though, since it's state funding, they're going to map where their stakeholders, have the highest desire, where they're meeting the needs of as many stakeholders in the state as possible, I think is what's driving this. What you're talking about is extraordinarily valuable. And I think, I think as we move along, we encourage, people who have the contracts to do the mapping to leave their sensor on while they transit from, this area to that area to do exactly what you just said, to pick up a little extra data. And or maybe that's partly the role of academic institutions is to, go into the deep unknown and see what's there. But no, it's good. That's a good point. Good comment.
I think there was an exploration justification, wasn't there?
Well, no, those weren't ranked in any order of results. That was the list we got from the IWC. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, Cheryl, when you show 16% interest in water column monitoring, can you elaborate on what that means? What are you monitoring in the water column?
Probably, I'm speculating here, so I ask any of my FCMaP co-chairs to chime in as well, but I would think water quality to some extent, water turbidity to some extent. Those would be the two things that would come to mind. Renee or Ash, any? No? Okay.
Thank you.
So can you elaborate a little bit on some of the methodologies and the technologies that you are using to create these mapping products, and some of the areas where there might be technology deficiencies?
Renee, I'm going to lob that to you.
I would probably direct that question more to the acquisition experts.
Oh,
is that what we're referring to?
Are you talking about the actual prioritization, like the ArcGIS online tool, or are you talking about the actual mapping?
What technologies, other than those that are like open, are you using open source data to put together things, or are you going out and you're actually doing in the field research using certain methods or certain technologies? Okay. And what could you use to make these products better or to increase the efficiency of collecting this data?
Okay. So you're talking about the prioritization data, not the seafloor data, correct?
No, the methods you're using. Like, are you using students out on boats? Are you using underwater vehicles?
Okay. Okay, sorry for my confusion. So the mapping has pretty strict specifications that were set by the state, working with some federal partners as well. And the methods being used, and I'll ask any of the people who have the mapping contracts is to add on to this if I miss something. But essentially, topobathymetric LiDAR are contracted for surveying all along the coast as deep as the sensor will penetrate. Areas where LiDAR is not achieved, the returns are not achieved, then that will be filled in with multi-beam, although that hasn't started yet. So they're still working on the topobathymetric LiDAR. So different vendors have different sensors, but they're all generating QA/QC data of the seafloor. So it's professional mappers that are doing the data collection. Yes, Ashley. Yeah. And that goes back to Steve's point as well. We're certainly happy to absorb any other data that are collected for any other reason. So even just to update our gap analysis and incorporate into this. So you might if you know of something, that's what we're here for. So. Any questions online? Go for it.
From Christopher Smith, does the University National Oceanographic Laboratory System vessels generate bathy data? Could it be used to address the question at list at the surface? That would be non-mapping UNOLS vessels / cruises.
So just read the first part of the question again.
Do the University National Oceanographic Laboratory System vessels generate bathy data? That was the first part of the question.
Yeah, UNOLS vessels. Yeah. The answer is yes.
And then the second question was, could it be used to address the question at the list at the surface?
Sorry, can you hear me?
I'm not sure what that means.
Can
Yeah,
you
we
guys hear
might
me?
want to ask them to elaborate, that person. You can turn the mic on online if you'd like to express that question verbally.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, it was to address the question that was asked earlier about the availability of or the gap analysis type question that was asked by Steve, I think it was. And the at list was supposed to be at least. It would address that question at the surface on the surface. It was just a typo.
Ah, gotcha. Thanks, Chris. Good. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Anybody? Anything else? Okay. So we are going into breakout. We're well ahead of schedule, so we can stay in breakout a little bit longer if we want to. Some of the spaces are bigger than others. So one group will meet in here, kind of in the back. You see that map on the wall. We'll kind of gather around. That is the map of the highest priorities. So we put one of those in each of our breakout areas. Down the hall that way, on the same side of the hall as this room, is ballroom number 3. That will be a second room. That's got a lot of room. And then out here in the hallway, there's some chairs set up, and there's a third map. That's probably going to be the smallest group. So that's why I kind of want a show of hands. How many people want to join in the breakout group discussion for the west coast of Florida? I'll be moderating that. Okay. So that's a good show. Okay, and then how about the East Coast? Christy will be moderating it. Okay, that's a little area. And then what about the Keys? That's okay. So I think the Keys, so the East Coast goes out in the hallway, Keys goes in ballroom 3, and I'll stay here with West Coast. Oh, great. Yeah.
Dave, if you want to ask your question verbally, you're welcome to. You unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, my question was, by the way, this is Dave Stein. I'm with NOAA. And my question is about what percentage of the budget's going to be left over after all of the topo bathymetric LiDAR is collected. Any idea?
We are not administering in any way the funds for the Florida Seafloor Mapping Initiative. Again, we're just a coordinating body, so I really don't have a sense of how much is going to be left over. The process right now is such that the topobathy LiDAR data collect has to be met. Most vendors are looking to wrap that up, I believe, by hopefully summer this year-ish, looking at some of the vendors. And then there will be new contracts put in place for multi-beam data in the areas in that 0 to 20 meter water depth that could not be collected with LiDAR. So then once that's done, any remaining monies would go toward mapping in deeper areas. And again, I don't want to speculate because that's not really our purview. You may try to ask someone from the state. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, will do. Thanks. No problem.
I wish I could answer that, but I can't. Yeah. Luke, wait. Luke.
Say that Kim Jackson at the Florida GIO would be the best person.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
to direct that to, or Alex Reed.
Yeah.
But can you reiterate what exactly you want these breakout groups to?
So we have a series of questions that we came up with. I guess it would have been nice if we had printed these out. We grow, but sometimes we still digress. We want people to gather around the maps, physical maps, and I mean you can bring your pen if you want, and tell us maybe beyond, like, did we miss anything? What are your priority areas? What do you think should be included in this prioritization that wasn't, and why? We want to know if you will use, or are you using the types of data that we had highlighted for prioritization, and then what will you do with the data itself? And then I have here, knowing what you would do with the data will help in planning efforts, especially because the deeper water hasn't been collected yet. And then, are you planning on collecting data, or are you actively looking for funding to collect data? So it's kind of a variety of questions, both around programmatic questions and around the actual results, and sort of what are we missing and what do you use it for? Just a little bit of extra meat to add on to just the maps and the statistics. That help? Okay, so remember, West Coast stays here. East Coast is out in the hall. Keys is down in ballroom 3. Go stretch your legs or come meet me in the back of the room. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, online will be participating, and Kat will be the moderator for the online participants. Thank you.
Talk to my computer. Can you all hear me if I'm talking on my computer, or is there too much background noise? Yes, okay.
We hear you.
That sounds good. So I shared my screen of the priority. I don't know if you guys also need like 2 minutes to stretch your legs. Hi, Steve. If you guys need any time to get water or anything, we can wait a second to start. We do have, if you have the schedule in front of you, this discussion goes until 1:50, and we are running ahead of schedule. It is only 1:15, so I encourage everyone to talk so that we have a great discussion. I have the questions in front of me, and I can throw them in the chat as well as we go through them. If you guys want to turn on your cameras, you can. If not, no worries as well. So the first question is going to be talking about the areas that you would select from the deeper water, and it is specifically asking about the 20 to 200 meters and why. So if you have any thoughts on that, raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. Yeah. I'll type that in the chat for you. What priority areas would you select in the 220 to 200 meter, and why?
Hey, can you hear me?
Let me see. Sorry, there's a lot of different. Okay, yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I'll take a first stab. This is Jennifer from BOEM. I think as far as BOEM is looking at for the next couple of years, we're looking at Panhandle of Florida based on some stated need. That area off of Tampa. So I think it's currently in kind of an orange, not quite red color.
Yeah.
And then the southeast coast of Florida continues to be a priority for looking for sand sources. And that's not a surprise.
Awesome. I appreciate you addressing each of the different areas too, because as you guys heard, the other breakout groups are separating into different sections, but you all have the awesome opportunity to talk about any of the regions. So I encourage you to, if you're an expert on one region, you can talk about just that region, or if you'd like to share about all the regions, that would be awesome.
I will throw out there that BOEM historically hasn't had a lot of interest in the Big Bend, partially because of the lack of coastal restoration projects requiring offshore sand. But we do recognize it as an area that may have some need coming up. With the water depth, though, the way it's captured, the fed boundary is different than this 20-meter bathy. So there's some different overlap there as well. So it's something we have on our radar, but not something that has expressed a direct need or become a priority just yet.
Awesome. Kind of have that one on the back burner. Thank you, Jennifer. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Mark, your camera's on. Oh, Chris Taylor.
Hi. Hey, everybody. Chris Taylor here with NOAA and COS, National Centers for Coast Ocean Science. Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the deeper areas, and we could go all around the state. So the Atlantic coast of Florida, understanding the distribution of hard bottom exposed rock that supports economically important fish species, that increases in importance as you proceed down past Cape Canaveral and approach the coral reef ecosystems. We know that coral reefs exist beyond the current extinction depths of the LIDAR that have been collected in those areas, and we anticipate that that's going to require a different sensor, probably multi-beam, to get to those depths and accurately characterize the coral reefs. That wraps around all the way through the Keys. We've done a pretty good job of mapping that already with a combination of efforts, and so I think there's going to be few gaps in those regions between multi-beam and topographic LIDAR. But then the west coast of Florida is terra incognita, like Steve Murawski indicated in his question. We know that there's carbonate rock that may emerge there in special places, but the prevalence of that is a bit unknown. And we know that those even small patches of reef can be extremely productive areas for snapper and grouper populations in the offshore environment. And it's just a widespread area on that West Florida shelf that has received very little attention. And so some reconnaissance map would be really helpful to help at least initially characterize and guide some future mapping.
And I'm going to jump in before Mark. I know he's got his hand up, but just as those things that you're looking for, Chris, that's what some of the things that BOEM recognizes as we need to know where they are so we know to avoid them. So it's just as important to know what is not sandy bottom, what is hard bottom, what is reef, on our kind of broad brush of where we may be looking next for sediment resources. We have to know what to avoid, right? So it's low priority for us to necessarily find, but it's high priority to know. So
yeah, great to know. Thanks, Sharon.
Mark, do you want to go now? I think your hand's up twice. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. And so with the Office for Coastal Management, we typically do not have our own mapping priorities. Our priorities are really what the states tell us their priorities are. So having said that, we've had some recent conversations with Chris Anastasio and Brad Furman about mapping and interest in deep water seagrass in the Springs Coast, which is that area northwest, I guess, of Tampa. And it's kind of those deeper water areas below 60 feet that, are kind of an unknown landscape. A lot of seagrass out there, but very difficult to map. So I'll channel Chris Anastasio and throw that into the mix if that's okay.
That is awesome. And it definitely goes along the lines of the reasons for mapping. I feel like you all are bringing up a lot of habitat characterization, and that is one of the main points that Cheryl brought up too. So, oh, Dave, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, so I'll second what Mark just said, because he and I both work on our benthic habitat mapping team in our office, for one. The other thing is that there's a huge opportunity for habitat mapping, fisheries management, and I don't represent the recreational fishing community, but I am an avid recreational fisherman, and having these areas mapped in high detail, beyond 20 meters off of the coast, which actually use the area, use the fishing grounds the most, would be, hugely important, especially around the Tampa Bay, Clearwater, Sarasota region.
So that kind of leads into the second question of how will you or are you using the data types? So that was an awesome segue. Thank you, Dave. And I definitely think that you guys are kind of alluding to more backscattered data, or does anyone have preference to what type of data that they work with on the daily? And that's what you hope that these mapping programs will bring, or anyone have thoughts?
Multi-beam primarily, but from the fishing, from the rec fishing community, multi-beam, but backscatter could also be important. I would say both. I mean, if you have the multi-beam, you're going to get the backscatter.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
And from the bone perspective, sub-bottom profiles, if we can throw those in there, and usually when you collect those, you're also going to be collecting bathy and multi-beam, and so you're getting those other pieces of information that are useful to some other folks as well. So I think the sub-bottom profile, and then following that up with actual physical data collection, so a sediment sample, whether it be core. I'm trying to remember this last prioritization effort, if they separated out grabs and cores, I can't remember, but either way, we would need both of them as well. But I think high-res bathy, I see Chris put that in there, high-res bathy and backscatter. I think those are things that if we're going out on a cruise, we're going to collect multiples, whatever we can tow at one time.
That's a good point. And bringing in the high resolution bathy and backscatter, I think that there's a few programs who are working on making standard what is actually considered high resolution. Do you all have thoughts on that? Because some groups might think that 1 degree is awesome, and then some might think that that is not worth inputting to their models, or vice versa. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that as well.
Well, I've got a question about the coverage. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but are we talking about the potential for continuous coverage, or are we talking about surveys that are going to be skunk striped?
I think that there's a combination of both, because currently in the gap analysis, the gaps have included the spots that are just stripes or little postage stamps. However, if you are looking to see a whole habitat, you might not be able to do too much with the data. That's just one transect line. And then also you don't have any information to calibrate that line if you're changing water depths or water different areas. Obviously you're going to have different properties. So if you could answer to both, that would be awesome.
Well, the highest resolution achievable, based on the density of the data, which I'm not really sure what that would be.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. That was kind of an unofficial question, but it was a follow-up to Chris's. The next question on here says, what would you do with the data from this area? And so our discussion could be kind of flipped, because we have all the regions to talk about it. And so maybe you guys can consider how you use the data from each region differently, or if you guys use the data all the same from each region, that would be good to know too.
So I'll jump in on that one. From the bone perspective, the first question will be, what is the bottom type? Is it sandy? Is it hard bottom? You know, what is the bottom type, and is it something that we need to include or exclude in the next phase of an investigation? And you know, this kind of goes back to that spacing question. When we're looking on a broad brush area like we've just done off of Texas, our lines were spaced 5 miles apart. Some of it was on a 1 by 5 mile grid, and that's strictly because we're covering the entire coast of Texas. So we had a lot of ground to cover with a little bit of money. So unfortunately, I think funding is going to be the driving factor for a lot of us, right? On the spacing side. So what will we do with it? If we get sub-bottom profiles along with the bathy, we'll likely plan additional sub-bottom profile or a complete suite of geophysics, like a second round in targeted areas based on what we find, and then also coring would probably, as far as BOEM's perspective, would be the next stage.
So somewhat to use these first rounds as a preliminary of what's out there and then adding on to those with more mapping suites.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a refinement of the geologic model is the way we look at it. And then try to, usually what we have at the end of every study is a field plan. We ask folks to propose a field plan based on the legacy data that they had, the new data collection, how they refine that geologic model, right? So the knowledge of what lies below the surface and what may be acting at the surface, and then plan a field plan from there for the future.
I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that. I'm going to switch to my grad student point of view to answer that question, and then switch back to just moderator after that. But from a grad student perspective, I think it's really cool that you are talking about the refinement of the geologic models and building onto it with your sub-bottom profiles and then the sediment samples. We did a cruise 2 years ago that we had multiple sensors running at the same time, so we did have multiple data sets at the exact same time with the exact same boat, and we just had them kind of spread out so they wouldn't interfere too much. But I do know that might be a catch-22 of like, yes, you're using a lot of money to do all the sensors at the same time, but are you saving money on ship time too? So that's always, I thought that was a good cruise to do for students because it was experimental, but I don't know about using actual money to do stuff.
I mean, that's one of the things that we prioritized here at BOEM is if we're putting a boat out in the water, we're collecting sub-bottom profile, side scan sonar, magnetometer, bathy at the same time, and all in one go. Because we're not going to put a boat out for each one, and then we also put all of our investigations out on C-Sketch just in case somebody else has something that they want to add on. We can try to collect and then we share all the data. And that's another thing that I think we need to all put in there is sharing the data.
Yes, that actually is not a question on here, but if anyone wants to talk to sharing data, that would be a good conversation, I think, to discuss, especially with it being regionalized and having different contractors do different regions. Just sharing the data in general is a good topic. Dave, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. So in terms of sharing the data, we're having some discussions, our office, Office for Coastal Management, we're having some discussions with Florida DEP on a data sharing arrangement so that, once the data has been collected, QC'd, and is deemed publicly available, we're going to be making it available through our Digital Coast application. So it'll have very, very wide public availability and accessibility that way. We've been talking mostly about the LiDAR portion of the project, but I think we could probably extend that to the multi-beam as well. And I know there's been some discussions with Jeff Danielson's group about creating a seamless gridded product, that creates the topobathymetric grid for the shallow and the deeper areas as well. So there are plans in the works right now to make the data publicly available. So you're asking about how we would use the data. Mark mentioned the deep water seagrass, the potential for deep water seagrass off of the Springs coast. I could see our office becoming involved with developing or delineating those areas and adding it to a composite product that we're developing right now through a project called Marine Cadastre. We're building a national composite seagrass data set, but most of our seagrass resources are along the immediate coast. So having a deep water portion of that would be beneficial.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, Kathleen, you put your hand up in the middle of Dave's question, or you had a question about the previous? I'm not sure.
Worse, I have a shameless plug. So the C-Sketch site that you're talking about, I actually manage. It's the C-Sketch US Mapping Coordination site. And C-Sketch is the platform. The US Mapping Coordination site is the website that we specifically manage. And I know Laura is on here. And so to respond to your email in the flesh, I'm working on the BOEM updates, and those should be up today. I've also already got the FSMI contracted areas on C-Sketch, did that this morning. So you guys can go look there and see what they've, completed and what they're still working on. And then, yeah, once that does make it over to OCM's data access viewer, those footprints will come off of C-Sketch. So it's good to know that they are sharing the data with us, NOAA, and looking forward to it. Also, I am locked out of the chat function for some reason, so I would love to pop a link in there, but I cannot, unfortunately. But yeah, shameless plug. If you guys have mapping plans, please send me your footprints. I'd love to host them. You get a free REST service out of it, and that's about all I have to say here.
And I'll second your shameless plug. Laura and I just sent someone to C-Sketch from NOAA, actually, for some work off in Texas. So
Awesome.
some of us are using it.
That's good. That's great to know. I love to hear that. Yeah.
Kathleen, if you want to send me the link, I can pop it in the chat for you, because it's a good link to have.
Sure.
Let me. It does say unverified next to your name, like guest unverified.
I don't know what that means. It's telling me that the chat is only available when the meeting starts. But I'm pretty sure this meeting has started. So
yeah, so same thing happened to me. I had to jump out and jump back in, and it worked for me.
I tried that already. Unfortunately, I'm not having a great time. Oh, but also, I guess, yeah, we're in a Florida meeting, so this is pertinent. There is a Florida section in C-Sketch, so you guys can see all of this stuff. It's got its own little section. It's pulled out nice and neat for you.
That sounds awesome. So we will put that in there. I just got your email. If anyone has any more comments on C-Sketch or anything, we can talk about that now, or we can go on to the next question. Katrina said NOAA Coast Survey has an external source team that would love to get their hands on this data with the metadata. And then she added in some contact information. Can you see the chat, Kathleen, or no?
Yeah, I can see. I just
okay. You just can't type.
That's okay. Yeah, and also it's just, I guess, that brings up a good point. I'd like to clarify. C-Sketch US Mapping Coordination is a planning site, so we take footprints. We don't actually take multi-beam, LiDAR, whatever. That all gets sent to Mia, whose contact information is in the chat.
Awesome. Okay, well, here's the link to the C-Sketch from Kathleen. That's a really long link. Okay, let me fix that link. But Let me first put the next question in, and then I'll fix the link and send that. And it is, are you planning to collect data anytime soon?
I'll throw one out there, and there's a really big asterisk because, you know, some of us in the federal government now have a budget, but we don't know what it means yet. We do have a planning, we put forth a profile to collect geophysical and geotechnical data, meaning fiber cores, off of the panhandle of Florida. I don't know if it's been funded yet. If it is, it will be in federal waters, likely off of the western panhandle, but it could extend into the eastern panhandle as well. It depends on the level of funding that we get, and then if we actually get funding for the profile. So stay tuned. The answer is a big maybe, but I'm hopeful that we'll have data collection in the panhandle in federal waters. This year, next year, probably next year.
Anyone else planning to collect data?
I can add for Coast Survey that Christy Fandel will be doing a lightning round tomorrow, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but she'll share the plans where NOAA Coast Survey is planning on doing some acquisition this coming year.
Nice. I like the foreshadowing, and way to stay tuned tomorrow if you actually want to hear what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I'll second Christy's lightning talk contribution. She's some part of the work they're directing through the navigation response team is directed from collaborative work from NCOS and National Marine Fisheries Service. And I don't think anyone from the Florida Keys Sanctuary is on, but I believe they still have time on a NOAA ship, and in collaboration with Grays Reef Sanctuary will be conducting some mapping in their jurisdiction down in the Keys.
That's fun.
I did forget, we do have a coring effort as a follow-up to some geophysics on the east coast of Florida. I'm trying to remember where, but I know it's in Sea Sketch, and that's being done out of the Marine Minerals Division office in Virginia for BOEM. I know it's in Sea Sketch, but I cannot remember for the life of me exactly where it is. There's 3 or 4 little pockets along the east coast of Florida.
Was it maybe by Cape Canaveral, or is that completely wrong?
I think I want to say we stayed away from Canaveral because of some other efforts happening, because there's a lot going on. BOEM funded around Cape Canaveral, some from the biology side, not necessarily from sediment resource aspect. So this was from sediment resource aspect. I want to say it was Flagler, maybe Flagler, Volusia, and St. Johns County.
All good.
Yeah, it's in Sea Sketch. That's all I remember. Because that's ongoing now. Data collection is underway.
Awesome. Even more reasons to use Sea Sketch. So thank you.
I'm emailing you another link that has that layer, Kat.
Oh, nice. Okay, we'll keep adding to the growth of knowledge here. Anyone else want to preview their lightning talks tomorrow? If not, we can move on to the next question, which is, are you actively looking for funding to collect data? Nods. I'm sure there's head nods between people who don't have their cameras on as well. Instead of making this a yes or no of are you actively looking for funding to collect data, maybe we can say where might you be looking for funding to collect data.
So I'll kick this one off. We are in the Gulf of Mexico side. We're looking for restore funding, which may be coming to an end. Restore funding, for those of you who don't know, was a result of the Deepwater Horizon incident. So that funding cycle, right, for new data collection is likely coming to a close. But we're always on the lookout for more. We do have a national offshore sediment inventory funding mechanism through BOEM. And with that, we as BOEM staff put forward profiles every year to be considered for NAWSI funding. And under that, we can collect new data in federal waters, which is how we're funding some of the work in Texas and some of the work that I just mentioned that will hopefully be upcoming in Florida. We put forth profiles when people express an interest. So if a state or a county or a parish come to us and say, we see the need on the horizon for, or another federal agency, we see the need on the horizon for sediment for a project or sediment in this general area. Or, you know, say from a sister agency, we know that they have a cruise coming up and they want to collect data, and we can maybe throw some more some more towfish on board. Those are the kind of things that we use to then write the profiles to request funding from NAWSI. So if we don't know what the needs are, we can't request the money, right? We have to have a profile to request money or a need to request money. So we go by what the needs are. Tell us what the needs are. It's the bottom line. And that's part of why every project we do, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, we specifically ask for a proposal for future work. Doesn't mean we'll get it funded, but we have that in hand should we find funding. And they work the same way on the Atlantic side of Florida as well, just out of the Virginia office instead of the Gulf of Mexico office.
That was very informative, and I appreciate your comments on that, Jennifer. Does anyone else have a similar storyline to that, or do you guys have, does anyone else take a different approach? Well, I guess the best thing would be is if we all just had infinite money to figure it all out. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I think also to side note back in the chat, the second link that Kathleen has sent to the specific layer still takes you back to the main data layers overarching tree in CSketch. So if Kathleen, you could just send me the name of the layer too, I can type that in the chat.
Yeah, it is the BOEM Marine Minerals Beach Nourishment Resource Evaluation layer, and I will put that in an email to you as well. Like I said, there are updates from BOEM coming like online like, as we speak, so those will.
Thanks. Okay. Well, does anyone else have any other comments? We made it through our entire worksheet, so awesome job, online group. We had a lot of land to cover, so I appreciate everyone's thoughts. But does anyone have any last closing comments, concerns, questions that I can relay back to the STAC group or anyone else who's here? If you guys want to address questions to the larger group too, there might be a part during the breakout group report out that we can talk about that.
So I threw it in the chat, but I think one of the other key pieces as far as BOEM knowledge goes is where are the data gaps and what would be the benefit of filling them in. It's just as important to know where we can't go. And for us in the world of sediment management, that would be things like hard bottom, really not seagrasses because we're talking about the water depths beyond that, artificial reefs, you know, we need to know where those things are that become kind of no-go areas for us, but those no-go areas for us are very important to other folks on the line as well. So filling those data gaps can be just as important as going out with the purpose of finding sediment. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, because then in turn you would find the sediment maybe, or you know where it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that no answer is sometimes just as important as a yes.
Yes, especially you brought up when we were talking about the hard bottom data. I remember you said that it's important to know where there's hard bottom and then different habitats. So.
Right. So then I may, in my little corner of the federal government, I am now going to avoid that area, right? But that becomes very important to someone else. So it might not help me as someplace to go look again, but it's going to help somebody is to, find something new or an area to protect or whatnot. So that no answer is just as important as a yes. As long as we share the data. I'll plug that again.
Yeah, and that I wanted to add that too. I'm not as familiar with this effort. This would be more Mia's role, but she's unable to attend. But is there, is the question being like, where is this data being shared? Like, is there any language in the contract for metadata that's being collected as new data is being acquired to make sure we have everything we would need to use it for multiple purposes, like data licenses and things like that. So if that's already an answer, like if it's already like, yes, all the data will be sent here with the metadata, that's great. But I figured I'd ask in case it has not been asked for Mia in particular, because I think she's been trying to get her hands on the topobathy data that's being collected or already being collected right now, and would love, of course, any additional data that we can add into our workflows.
I personally do not have any comments on that too much. I think it was Dave earlier who was talking about how Florida GIO might be working on a concept which will turn into more hardcore plans and then eventually be distributed as the work method for this metadata, right? Or am I missing that?
No, you characterized it correctly. They have a cloud storage space right now that the data is going to be housed in, and that data will then be either copied over to Digital Coast, or we'll be able to access it through our Dave, our data access viewer application. We might through some of the cloud tools be able to access the data using our clip and ship technology from system to system, instead of actually having all of the data live within Digital Coast. But we're not exactly sure how that's going to play out, but it will be publicly available. And I'm assuming that there will be FGDC or ISO compliant metadata, because we wouldn't make it available if there wasn't. Now, the question about whether you can get your hands on the metadata now, I'm not sure. I know a lot of the work is in progress, so I don't know if metadata has been generated for any of those data sets. I think you'll hear more about that tomorrow morning.
Perfect. Yeah, I was thinking more like uncertainty, like vertical uncertainty happens to be like pretty important for like how we deal with when we do have multiple data sets in one location and looking at the quality. So sometimes that just might be like, which sonar are you using? And like, are you doing sound speed casts? And so some of that extra metadata I know Mia has listed out, and I'll try to grab her slide and just add it to my slide for tomorrow for the lightning round. But just kind of, yeah, that's great. Like the getting the data and then just kind of thinking about some of the metadata. I know she's been working with like NCEI and some of the other folks that collect bunches of bathymetric sources and cruise ID and verse unique ID and all sorts of trying to standardize that metadata across the board. And so just making sure we have an idea of what we're getting would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then I think it depends on the agency that collected the data and kind of when, as to what's publicly available. Anything that BOEM collects is going to be available through MMIS. It is going to be in NCEI, and there will be metadata associated with it. So I think it may, I guess the first question is, what data are you looking at and trying to get a hold of the metadata for? And then we can answer the question, right, as a larger group of how you find it, or if it will be available. I'm also very interested in is it called FSMI now? I know that it's got an official name. Sorry, forgive me. I used to work for FDEP when some of this was first proposed, and then I've switched over to BOEM now, and so names have changed. So yeah, so the question is just how it's going to be presented is the way I look at it.
That's a good question. And yeah, I think that you all brought up really good points. Are there any last questions that anyone has? I know you can see Casey, Tom Chuck's screen that all the other groups are kind of like breaking up. So I think that we're wrapping this section up. But if there's any last comments, you can throw them in the chat. Other than that, I thought this was a really good discussion. So I appreciate everyone chiming in and chatting and not being afraid to share what's going on with their groups. No? Okay. Well, thank you guys. And then, stay on too, because in the agenda, then we'll have the breakout group report out. So if you guys want to see the other groups and what they were talking about, reminder that they were in their different sections. So we had the Keys, the East Coast, and the West Coast. And then after we do that breakout group report out, then we'll have a general break from 2:20-ish to 2:35.
there. So you've got, of course, is great for navigation as well, but certainly in identifying where sand is transporting from and to, and identifying large portions of that sand, which are used in renourishment projects and coastal projects throughout the state. Historical vessel navigation, so AIS vessel traffic, historical plots to identify any areas of navigation importance. And the last note we have here is crowdsourced data if funding is low. So that's a common conversation, I think, in all of this. Question 2 here, how will you or are you using the different data types? One distinction that was made here was the difference between bathymetric LiDAR data and multibeam, so sonar LiDAR data. With the bathymetric LiDAR data, it's typically a lower density than the multibeam. And also it doesn't, the multi-beam would have the backscatter attached to it. So bottom classification, bottom type. So, where those are of higher value, those types of data, kind of pointing towards that. There's obviously economic advantage to the bathymetric LiDAR data collection, but perhaps not the value with the backscatter. So balancing that. Was that conversation. There's a note in here about adding sub-bottom data to collection campaigns, and kind of the concept is the boat's out there running anyway. So slap a sub-bottom on there. We make that sound easy, but sure, yeah, go ahead, slap a sub-bottom on there. If somebody's willing to pay for that, you've already got a boat out there doing it, why not? So that was part of that conversation. Let's see, going on to question 3, what will you do with the data from this area? And so really this comes back to who's using this, who wants it. I think the main reason that we all kind of agreed on in our group was habitat. So again, sort of back to the answer to that first question is this recreational fishing community, which is a strong part of the Florida economy, divers, and that sort of stuff. And then also just ecological reasons, understanding the habitats out there, which are obviously very prevalent along that break and into the shore as well. Understanding the geological features in that area. Got a note in here about outreach efforts being initiated to answer these questions. So I think a large amount of outreach was done at the very beginning of this, and sort of the point was made in our group to continue that moving forward as well. Not think of that as something that was done before and we don't need to think about it anymore, but continuing that effort throughout the life of this project and beyond. And that, yeah, another note in there about crowdsourcing. So that's come up quite commonly in this. And then the last thing here is knowing what you do with the data will help with planning efforts, especially because the deep water data hasn't been collected yet. Are you planning to collect data? This was a question kind of out to all the different vendors here. There's one word on this. It says yes. Actually 2, yes, comma, always. So our groups are always collecting data out there. A lot of times these are funded by private groups. But when that data is, when those contracts are federal, that data should be able to flow into the system and be used by everybody. And then, are you actively looking for funding to collect data? Yes, again, yes. Actively looking for any and all mapping campaigns out there. I think all the vendors in this group would agree. But yeah, so that was the East Coast group. I guess I'll hand this on over to, or any questions? Where are we going next? Going west, going Keys, going wrap around the state. Okay, who had the key? Renee?
So I made the mistake of not designating a note taker or reporter out. So that's my job now. And I didn't have very great notes. So please, if you're in the Key West team, pipe in if I missed anything or got it wrong. All right. So starting with the questions. Now we had good representation from industry, few research folks. So we did actually write a few things on the map on what we thought were priorities in general. There was no serious issues anyone found with what had been prioritized or anything glaring, any glaring omissions. But we did point out a few things that could be a priority based on what has been a problem with acquisition, specifically this being a really tough year with the weather. So there was a few spots that were pointed out on the map. The point of temporal gaps came up as well. So, and this is a tough one to, but something to be considering as we go through this prioritization effort. I heard shifting sands, those are things that change over time. Habitat degradation, we storms come through, things change. So temporal gaps are probably something that needs to be considered relative to acute events like hurricanes. Talked about the opportunities for, and this is more specific to when we get into the multi-beam acquisitions, deeper water acquisitions. How do we, get the most bang out of our buck? And we talked about skunk striping, using transit lines, maps of fishing effort that might indicate areas that could be of high interest, might have structure on them. The idea here is, getting to that point on exploration. I think this hits that as well. How do we know, where we want to map? If it's low relief, does it need a whole lot of effort? Well, how do we know we're not missing something if it's low relief? Really depends on what your interests and your needs are, what you want out of your data. If you're looking for fish habitat, you want to know where those small reefs are and that you might miss otherwise. But there's, I think, some opportunity, and it does get used, and we pointed out some areas where we have been using north of Pulley Ridge transit lines and fishing effort maps. Talked about quality overlap, especially now moving into the acquisition, the multi-beam acquisitions, the acoustic acquisitions. Quality came up for the long-term housing, EROS. We need to, our metadata needs to be very clear on what's there. It's need for identifying where the gaps are in the data. It's hard to it's hard to commit to any level of quality if the contracts don't have that written in. Also an important point. Yeah, the weather in the Keys, and this isn't, I think, specific to the Keys, but in general, acquisitions have been pretty tough. There's not a lot of no-fly days, and with the funding for this and FSMI having limited time, we talked about how do you fill in. So, and Dr. Joseph Daum mentioned that I think might be of interest to folks. When we have these gaps, we're not getting, we're not catching those good days. You're in shallow water, it can be hard to do an acoustic survey. It's also obviously takes a lot more time, can be more expensive. Are there other options? And we talked about with some autonomous underwater vehicles that are being developed. And I have Dr. Daum's information here. It's the Tampa Deep Sea Explorers, and they have some affordable equipment in $20,000 range that can be outfitted with different types of sensors and might be of use for filling in those gaps as well. Probably missed other things because I tried to go through my notes quickly. Anything else that I missed? Captured it all? Okay. Funding. Oh yeah. Well, yeah, we did identify there was needs for funding. Yeah, and then specifically also for those that new equipment, looking for opportunities to apply that new technology. That's underwater LiDAR, which is pretty interesting. Anything else? Cool. All right. Thanks, guys.
I had the biggest group and the poorest note taker, me. I'm going to go back here because I took most of my notes on the map and did not translate them. What priority areas would you select? I got kind of blank stares when I asked that first question. What priority areas would you select in the 20 to 200 and why? Yeah, so I don't think we talked more about we had a lot of more organic conversation than necessarily sticking tightly to the script, I think. And so a lot of it was around, getting back to Steve's earlier point is, there's this huge bubble. I know you guys can't see in the front of the room, can't see this in detail, but you see this big red circle here. It's a big area of this didn't come out as high priority, where we know that there's some data, but for the most part, this is a gap area. And that it's an unknown and should be at least explored by running some transect lines through. We know just based on what limited data do exist that it's critical for habitat as well as identifying features like paleo shorelines, which help us better understand sea level rise trends, historic sea level rise trends, or geologic sea level rise trends. Rick pointed out that this area, I think it was Rick, has been surveyed pretty heavily by the oil and gas companies. And if there's any way we could get those data, but as I think everyone in this room knows, unless you have a really good connection, which we might have one through BOEM, they're highly unlikely to release data, possibly releasing a coarser resolution data set. They might consider that, so it might be worth us. Even if it was a coarser resolution data in such an unknown area, it could help us identify some larger scale features or areas of interest that might help drive that becoming more of a priority than it came out here. So I think that was kind of an interesting concept that FCMaP should consider using contacts and connections and see if there's any way we can gain access to oil and gas data. Let's see. We talked a lot about what are the uses for the data, what are people using the data for, and I think Zach Westfall took credit for this entire from Pinellas County took credit for this entire yellow bubble. I don't think it's just him, but but this area was for him and for others that it's extremely important for modeling. Whether you're doing ocean circulation modeling or hydrodynamic flood modeling, having a really good understanding of the shape of the ocean floor is critical. And then the other things that feeds is, not just the bathymetric data, but the additional data that you need, and it just keeps coming back up the bottom type, right? So that's something that we know is being collected in the form of backscatter. I keep looking at you, Amar. Yeah, with the multi-beam. If multi-beam is being collected, or when multi-beam starts being collected as part of the Florida Seafloor Mapping Initiative, they will be collecting the backscatter, but don't really necessarily have plans to process it and have it be a deliverable. But those data then exist, so we know that they exist. So that could really help us get at, on a large scale, that bottom type. And then framework and structure habitat, modeling came out. We had a lot of discussion also around the whole idea of crowdsourced bathymetry. Could we get commercial entities to participate in a crowdsourced bathymetry program? But then it was somebody else pointed out that the issue there was that, if you're a transportation company, you're just trying to get from point A to point B as quickly as you can because, time is money. And you might not want to go at the speeds that one would have to go at to collect, good enough data to be useful to a program. Someone mentioned NOAA has a program, a Vessels of Opportunity program. I don't know if anybody wants to expand on that, but that might be a nice program to use. Apparently, NOAA is working on developing the guidelines for crowdsourced bathymetry, to support things like Seabed 2030, that sort of thing. So maybe working a little bit more closely with that program of Vessels of Opportunity program. One of the questions was, what will you do with the data from this area? And one of the big things, people have all their different applications, but I think one of the things that came out that Jeff Danielson from the USGS mentioned was, what he's going to do, which is going to be valuable for everybody, is data integration, right? Taking all these disparate sets of data, including older data, and making one seamless topobathy model for it. So even if the data are, again, not of all the same resolution in that model, having that will definitely be useful. Again, it was a big crowd, and we had that's kind of what I remember. That's what stuck in my head. Does anybody who was joining in on that conversation want to mention something that that they thought was important that I overlooked here? No, you just all want to go get your coffee. Okay. Good. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for your participation. Oh, and I asked if this was useful at all, and they said yes. And everybody's looking for funding for mapping. Online.
Just one more group. So we did have the group online go ahead and look at all the different sections. I'll stand up so you can see me, but I need to stay here to monitor if any questions pop up. So we did look at each region because everyone online could not choose which group to go to. So our first question was, what priority areas would you select and why? And so we were looking, a lot of groups said the Panhandle of Florida, Tampa, and the Southeast Coast. And that was mostly for sand for BOEM. And then we also have the Big Bend was kind of on the back burner for BOEM, and that was a potential future projects. And then Chris Taylor shared that the deep areas of the coast of Florida have a lot of habitat and exposed rocks. So for an example, Cape Canaveral and the coral reef systems and how that wraps around. And they want to characterize these and see what they can find. The West Coast is kind of an unknown, similar to what Steve was saying. And we can even with like small reefs, those are super important out there. That was a topic of discussion. And so just kind of a reconnaissance effort would be awesome. And even if you find where there's not these hard bottoms and you find sand, one person may be looking for that type of habitat characterization instead. And so those are what priority areas in conclusion we were kind of looking for. And then when we looked at how or are you using the data types, we kind of said high resolution and Bathian backscatter data is super important for this because the data types to use would be multi-beam, sub-bottom profile, and then we even kind of jumped in on sediment samples as a possibility to back up what we are seeing in that characterization effort. Let's see, moving on to question 3, what will you do with the data from this area? And basically, we had a lot of people interested in bottom type in our group. And so what is the bottom type was our main question, and then our main answer for that. And the refinement of geologic models based on legacy data and new data collection was super important for this group. And looking at seagrasses on the springs and the coast, and those are deeper seagrasses, not necessarily the ones that we see in the 0 to 20, but the ones that you do see a little bit further out were of interest as well. And they brought up the marine cadastre map was important for that seagrass effort. And also in this question, the topic of data sharing popped up. That was super prevalent. We had Kathleen Young on our call, so she was able to share a lot of the C-Sketch links and how important it is to share your data once you actually collect it, because you can't do anything with your data if you don't share it with others. And last questions we had, are you planning to collect data? Everyone did say yes, but kind of with a hesitant because tomorrow we will have those lightning talks that everyone will share how they are planning to collect data and where they are planning. So tomorrow at 12:50, we'll have the first lightning talks. That's an incentive to hop back on and listen in on where they are planning those data collections. And then lastly, we have, are you actively looking for funding to collect data? Also, yes. And we, from BOEM, BOEM had a really nice response, and they put forth profiles and initiatives based on the needs identified by local and federal agencies. And they identified data gaps at BOEM as well. And I guess the bottom line with BOEM is that they welcome conversations about data and sediment needs with everyone. And they really do like to know how this data is being used, and data sharing and outreach are just the main keys. And then we did have questions towards the end of just like overall summaries. What are the data gaps and where are we filling in the different characterization of the habitats? So that was our summary. Sorry, my notes were kind of everywhere, but thank you for listening and thank you for participating. We had a good online group.
Hey, Christy's job for a second. That wraps us up. We're on break now until 2:35, correct? And there's coffee and snacks outside. Thanks, everyone.
framework for benthic data integration and distribution on the West Florida shelf. And I'm going to start with talking a little bit about why this is important. Hopefully change the slide. Okay, slide, please. Maybe not, or maybe I just ad-lib the whole thing. There we go. So I'm sure many of the people in this room are aware of fair data principles. So these apply to open data, and there's a few things that are really important about fair data principles. The first being that there's a persistent DOI, or a way that you can always find that data. The second is that the data is meaningfully interactable and accessible. It's not locked. It's not behind a paywall or something like that. It's interoperable, so you can use it on any different machines in many different environments, and it's reusable, so it has enough metadata or enough information with it that somebody else can take your data and reuse it. It's green. Hello? Okay, great. Okay, we'll go with this. So these principles are really key to having open data that you can actually use, and not just data that's sitting there and kind of obsolete because you don't have the right information with it or it doesn't work on all systems. Next slide, please. And fair practices are really important because they lead to data synthesis, data generalization, and data comparison, which is important for thinking about the ways that we can take findings from one study or from one group of information and apply them to a larger area or across different areas. And I think we can all think about that Nature, the science paper that has the big global map in it, and many of those global maps are coming from groups that are using open data, and those are really critical pieces of information when we think to some of the advances in science that we've seen recently. Next slide. The other thing is that something we've already touched upon, especially in the West Florida group back there, is data reuse, using something over and over again. So there's a finite amount of money for data collection, and being able to reuse a data set over and over is really important for getting the best bang out of our buck, especially when it comes to things like taxpayer dollars paying for a lot of the data that we're collecting. Next slide. So this is becoming really a thing that's gaining traction from both funders and journals. So the first policy that we have here is the NSF policy that is expecting investigators to share their data as they're collecting it and within a reasonable time. NASA also has a very similar policy. So funding agencies are starting to require people that are getting federal funding to do this, as well as there's the AGU policy for their journals here. And I'm sure if you're publishing, you've encountered this, where you have to submit your data for publication often before you get a approval for that journal article to be accepted. So it's becoming more and more common that these are requirements that are happening for both funders and in journals. And next slide. And the last one being that even the White House has a policy as of 2022 on federally funded data being open. So thinking about how open data happens and the fair principles behind them are really important for this to actually be something that we can all use, and that we can all have these great data sources available to us. Next slide. So our goal in this project is to establish a West Florida Shelf Standardized Mapping Framework Center of Excellence to facilitate a collaborative effort to develop a framework for aggregating that benthic data on the West Florida Shelf. So trying to figure out what we need to do to have a place, or to have a community where we're aggregating that data in a way where people can reuse our data. Next slide, please. And we have a couple of goals here. The first is to review successful frameworks that have already done this, looking at marine data integration and distribution around the world to kind of get an idea and a sense of what's already out there. The second is to get community agreement on the structure of the framework for data integration and distribution on the West Florida Shelf. And the third is to build a set of tools to support that framework so that people can do this more easily. Next slide. So I'm going to first talk about the first thing that we did, which was reviewing the successful frameworks from around the world. Okay, next slide. Next slide, sorry. So the gold standard, we literally were trying to figure out like, okay, who does this the best? Who has got the place that you can go to a one-stop shop and get all the data that you need? And next slide. Sorry, this is going to be annoying with all the animations. Yeah, okay, I'll try it again. We'll see what happens. And what we really found is that the European Union through the EMA.net is really the place that is doing this great. They have a lot of data sources. It's easy to upload your data, and it's easy to find data in it as well. But what we also found with that, yay, it worked. Oh man. Well, anyway, I can keep going. So what we found is that it's actually very, very expensive to run this kind of program. So between 5.4 and 13.7 million euros per year, very expensive costs. So the first thing that we figured out was, as a Florida FCMaP program, we're probably not going to be able to do this, at least in this first go around of this grant, that we're not going to be able to be the central portal. But we also found, slide. We also were trying to look to see, does something similar exist in the US, the Gulf of Mexico region, or Florida? Next slide. And the answer was not really, but I'll explain why going forward. So next slide. There was really no simple one-stop shop that everyone could send their data to. A lot of times they're thematic or geographic. So think about like data atlases, data portals that are on a particular type of data, or project-based. Next slide. Of course, the one thing that we do all think of is the National Center for Environmental Information, which does have a plethora of different types of data, particularly coming out of the federal agencies. Next slide. But the submission process is not always straightforward in a site like this. So next slide. I'm really sorry. Never use animations again. You have to have a detailed archive process that goes through quite a few steps to use the NCEI database. And so it's not straightforward and not always available to everyone. Next slide. So just to summarize what we found is that, I'm really sorry. Next slide. Next slide. Let's just go through all of them. Just get through all of them. There we go. So NOAA NCEI is potentially the best option. It's national, and some types of data aren't necessarily readily available, but they are putting together a Gulf of Mexico data atlas. We did find that GOMA's Gulf of Mexico data platform is very promising, but it's not quite comprehensive and all-encompassing enough. And we also found that GridC is a great platform for putting data in. Statewide, there's a couple of options. So there's the Florida Geographic Data Library, which is maintained at the Florida Geoplan Service, but not regularly updated. And there's also the Florida Geospatial Open Data Portal, but it only accepts data that's cannot be hosted elsewhere. So there's not one stop. What we're trying to say here is there's not one stop shop for the benthic data on the West Florida Shelf, nor did we have the resources available to create that. So this is where our project took a bit of a turn. Next slide. So we went through and we reviewed existing successful frameworks. And our second goal is to get community agreement on what we would need to come up with a structure for that framework of data integration and distribution. And that really means, what standards would we need in order to even have the data available that could be integrated and distributed on the West Florida Shelf? So that's what we've been doing for the past couple of years. Next slide. And the way that we're doing that is through, one, an evaluation of current practices. How are people sharing data? What types of metadata are they sharing? What are their types of data they're using, and how are they using it? And then the second part was to get expert input on what sorts of standards are needed to make data, and open data in particular, more in these fair practices and standards. Next slide. So first of all, I want to say giant thank you for anyone who was here in the FCMaP 2022 meeting in November that took our survey, because we were here then, and we took a survey just looking at how people are sharing data and what they're doing. And so we had about 100 respondents, and again, it was in the fall of 2022. Next slide. And then they fell along these particular sectors. So we had a great number of people in government. Over about 55% of our people, or the people taking it, were from government, probably even a little bit of an overrepresentation. 32% from academia, and then we had 11% from private sector and 2% from nonprofit. So we had a good spread of people from across different sectors taking this. Next slide. And the first thing that we found is that even across sectors, so this is looking at academia, federal and state and local governments, and private and nonprofit, across sectors, people are using data in the same way, the benthic data in the same way. They're doing a lot of collecting and analyzing and consulting, a little less distribution, but pretty equally divided amongst these different sectors. And all of these seem to be pretty important for data that's being openly available. We also found that across, again, academia, federal, local government, private, nonprofit, that the different types of data that were being used were pretty comparable. So this is looking at biological, chemical, and oceanography, geological, hydrographic imagery, and other data sets. And we saw a lot of people using hydrography as one of the main ways that they were using these types of data, as well as biological and imagery. So again, comparable across all sectors. Next slide. And this is where we really found some interesting meat to kind of spur our next part of this project on. So we asked people about how frequently they were distributing their data. And the answers could be on a fixed schedule, not upon request, not typically shared outside this program, publicly available after collection, and publicly available after QA/QC. Next slide. Oh no. Well, what we found was that 48% of people are either not sharing their data or sharing it upon request, which means that there's a huge chunk of data out there that's not openly available, even though we have these mandates and from journals and funders saying that we have to do this. There's still a great percentage of data that is not available, which we were really surprised about. Next slide. So we asked people, what is your limitation to data sharing? The first thing that came up was time and staff limitations, which I think we can all agree on. If I had more time in the day, I'd probably do more data sharing. I would do a better job of it. And I'm certain, like everyone else, has the wants to do that type of stuff, but often time and staff is the problem. But the next chunk of things is actually things that we can deal with. Like, I can't give you money to increase your time or your staff, but I can help train people in how to deal with metadata. So we have things like variability and collection of methods and protocols for similar data sets, lack of training, guidance, or protocols, inconsistent formatting, and missing and incomplete metadata. So those are all things that as a community we can deal with, and we can either develop standards on or train people on, or even start educating students as they come through this process and why these things are important. So that was really heartening, that even though I can't deal with the money part of this, there are some things that we can do as a community to start growing our ability to share data in a way that helps everyone out. Next slide. The last question that we asked is your program currently using a fixed standard for metadata or data transferring? And what we found is that 80% of the people were no, or I'm not sure, meaning that, and a good portion of people were 41% were I'm not sure if we're using a metadata standard. So that says to me that there's a lot of metadata out there that is not standardized in a way that we would allow for data reuse. So there's a lot to work on here, is what we really found through this survey. Next slide. Okay, so just to kind of close out this portion of it, we closed the survey in the spring, where we wrote and revised a manuscript, and actually we're submitting the manuscript this week, which is really exciting. So be on the lookout soon for that, the information from this part of the project. Next slide. So next, I'm going to talk to you about getting expert input to establish these standards for Florida and to seek community agreement on these standards, these open data standards. Okay, next slide. So what we did is a process where we are using experts, so experts across disciplines, to try to understand what each discipline is using as data standards, as kind of the thing that their particular discipline goes to for data standards. Then we're taking that recommendation from those experts and moving it into a stakeholder survey for a community agreement to see if the community is particularly in each discipline agrees with that. We're writing a technical report, which it gives you basically the background and all of the information on what we found through this process. And then finally, we're writing a paper on the findings. So looking at those recommendations and using them in a manuscript form to give it to the community. Okay, and so these are the different disciplines. We have experts from bathymetry and backscatter, geology and geomorphology, chemistry, biology, and physics. And next slide. And we had our first meeting on November 30th, 2022, which was also coinciding with this FCMaP summit last time. We had experts from each of these disciplines join that group, as well as members from our integration team from NOAA, Gulf of Mexico Alliance, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWRI. So these people all came together in a room to kind of talk about this problem and to kick off this expert part of it. And I should say the integration team is really looking to see how our recommendations correspond with recommendations coming out of those different federal and state groups going forward. So this is an example standard. I'm not gonna make you read the whole thing, but it's just to give you an idea of what's coming out. So this is oh, 3 minutes. Okay. Sorry, I did not even know you were over there. Great. Okay. So so just to quickly go through these are just the different types of things that our experts are recommending, and they're from across different groups. So next slide. For instance, we have international standards. You can just go ahead and do all those. The different international standards that are recommended by just the different disciplines, national standards, regional standards, state standards. There's even papers from academic papers that people are recommending as standards within this group. Next slide. So they are really from a plethora of sources and institutions. Next slide. And there's no one to go-to source for benthic data standards is what we're finding, that they're really spread across many different types of institutions. Next slide. Some common resources that we are finding is that oceanbestpractices.org is a great place to look for data collection standards. The Gulf of GridSea also has some great standards for metadata and also uploading data. And so that's one thing that's been recommended. And then the BCO, DMO, and the International Hydrographic Organization are also things that are highly recommended. I want to say that this survey is still open for community agreements. So there are flyers on all of your tables that have a QR code, as well as this is the QR code here. So if you have an opinion on data standards and guidelines for open data, we really highly recommend, or we highly hope that you'll take our survey. It should take, depending on how many disciplines that you are a part of, like 10 to 15 minutes. Next slide. And we'll keep going. Next slide. So just to round up what we're doing with this part of this, expert recommendations have been drafted. Stakeholder survey is distributed and open, as I've just said, and the technical report will be published in April and the paper will be submitted in April. So also look for those things. Next slide. So we finished part one. We're in the process and finishing up part two. And I just want to briefly talk about part three, which is building a set of tools to support the framework that we've come up with. Next slide. So this is just a prototype of something that we're trying to work on, but it's basically a way for people to have a GUI to make metadata. So it has several different types of metadata standards in there from across different types of repositories to help a person that might not know much about metadata create that file for them. Next slide. So it has an interface like this where it just asks you about the different pieces of information about your data set and what's required by that particular entity that you're trying to submit to. Next slide. It also will have a interface, mobile interface. So that's exciting as well, as that we're trying to expand this, beyond just the our desktops. Next slide. So we're hoping to have that fully implemented prototype by the beginning of the summer, and we're looking for a focus group for our tool. We're going to refine the tool based on that feedback and then finalize and disseminate the tool. Next slide. So that's exciting. We're also hoping that will be done by the end of the summer. Next slide. And so just some lessons were learned. Disciplinary experts are an in-demand group, and it's hard to get them in the same place together. When many perspectives are involved, there are different quality of outcomes. So different disciplines have huge amounts of variability in how advanced they are in these standards. So there's huge different quality of outcomes. Teams are important for success, and getting people to take surveys can be very difficult. Next slide. Okay, I see. Next slide. And just thanking our expert team here, some of whom are in the room, and the link to the survey, and our project team as well.
So we're going to hold off on any questions because we're going to bring the speakers back up for a panel, and we want to get back on schedule here. So next, I'm going to introduce Chris Taylor from NOAA. His presentation will be a virtual presentation. Yep. And he's part of the NCOS habitat mapping team, and he's going to give us an update on the Florida Coral Reef Habitat Mapping Data Atlas, Volume 3.0. So is Chris
Thanks,
there?
Cheryl.
Hey.
Yes, how's my audio? Can everyone hear?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks. Yeah, sorry I can't be there in person, guys. It's a great conversation. I really appreciate the deep dive from Anna in the previous presentation, because that's we're finding that to be one of our challenges, is we're trying to assemble data for sort of a purpose-driven data digital atlas. Can I get next slide, please? Yeah, so this work was initially funded by a Coral Reef Conservation Program, and more recently through a collaboration between NCOS, NOAA Fisheries, and the Office of Coast Survey. And this work was initiated by a call from the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. If I could get the next slide. So in 2007, we answered a call for a need to assemble the available data that could support habitat interpretation, habitat mapping in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, as they were entering into a long period of regulatory review for their boundaries and management zones. All of this data exists in a variety of sources. As Anna pointed to, there's a variety of archives managed by federal agencies, state agencies, and academic groups. And some of those data sources come from a variety of sensors and platforms and standards in acquisition. And so while a lot of this data exists in other places, we felt it was necessary, if we're going to assemble the data that was available for interpreting and creating habitat maps, to provide that initial review through subject matter expertise, to understand the coverage, the resolution, the quality, any artifacts that may be in these data sets that are remotely sensed or direct observations, and how that may impact the quality and uncertainty in habitat maps. Again, this project started as the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary Digital Atlas, but since we've been partnering with them, we've come to be aware of other partners that have needs for similar data, National Marine Fisheries Service, the state of Florida, and we've changed. And since we've moved out of the boundaries of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary and are moving northward, and so this final version of the data digital atlas will be called the Florida Coral Reef Benthic Mapping Digital Atlas. But this atlas includes a variety of data sources. You can click and surf around, look at remotely sensed data from LiDAR, topographic LiDAR, topographic LiDAR, and multi-beam, direct observation from drop cameras and ROVs and towed camera systems. You can surf around and look at the images in thumbnails or full and native resolution, and come to understand the data that are available for mapping, modeling the habitats of your choice in this region. Next slide, please. As we assembled these data sets, we found there was a critical gap. So this is the extinction depth of most of the LiDAR sensors, although we understand the new sensors may be providing more and deeper depths. That's the depth where the LiDAR breaks off, which is about 20 meters, and where our large ships that are transiting through the area can pick it back up safely and at a safe distance from the reef crest. We call this the outer reef bar. There's also high turbulent and high turbidity areas in Hawk Channel between the Florida Keys and the mainland that are not well sampled with LiDAR, as another gap. And we've worked closely with Coast Survey over the past several years to fill these gaps through either contracted surveys or more recently with their navigation response team out of Fernandina Beach. Next slide, please. And we're continuing to move northward. So the data that won't be included in this final update 3.0, which is going to be published in the next couple of weeks, we're continuing to march northward to Martin County, past north to Jupiter, at least this spring in 2024. That's the initial remote sensing data that's providing us an indication of the roughness, complexity of the seabed, maybe provide elevation and backscatter that are indicative of the edges of that reef. We know that reef extends well beyond the 20-meter isobath that the LiDAR achieves, and the boundaries of that outer reef bar varies as you move northward towards the end of the reef tract. And so we're going to be planning a ground truthing campaign, and I'll talk about it a bit later how we're implementing uncrewed systems throughout that campaign to expand significantly the way that we're ground truthing that area. And that'll happen late summer to early fall of 2024. Next slide. So the data atlas by the numbers, we have 52 originally remotely sensed or observational data sets in this data viewer. We have reviewed through subject matter experts and derived or interpreted mapping products, including classified habitat maps to expand the interpretations of Tortugas Bank. We've also processed and reprocessed some bathymetry and backscatter to remove artifacts and improve the quality, all summing up to about 13,000 square kilometers of LiDAR and multi-beam bathymetry collected by NOAA and partners. And more recently, to fill those gaps, we've leveraged resources from the National Marine Fisheries Service to direct the navigation response team to collect almost 250 square kilometers of the outer reef bar since 2021. Next slide. Yeah, but this is coming to an end. So our funding was initiated through NCOS through internal funds, was picked up by the Coral Reef Conservation Program, and that funding through the cross-pillar priority of mapping habitats has come to an end in 2023. But Florida FWC is going to continue this charge, and Dave Koken will give a presentation coming up soon with the unified reef map, not marine map, that is bound to include new data and build upon and improve the existing unified reef map in the Florida Keys Reef Tract, expanding our ability and improving the precision of those maps to support ecosystem management, restoration, and resource assessments. And so stick around for Dave's talk later this afternoon. Next slide. So why are we doing all of this? So we built this data viewer in order to help guide and provide the foundational data for the regulatory and boundary review by the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. And as we were assembling the data, filling some gaps as we had resources available to conduct our own mapping, we provided some very critical data to Tortuga South Ecological Reserve that found a very high diversity, high productivity area within the existing boundaries that needed more protection. So these data sets, being able to assemble them in one place, provide us with that input. We were also able to characterize seascapes in the context of coral restoration. Thank you. Next slide. And this is guiding and helping to provide the Mission Iconic Reefs Restoration Plan with the reefscape context, reaching areas that are deeper than were previously achievable by LiDAR. Next slide. And like I indicated, that outer reef bar was poorly characterized. The outer reef, and we know those deeper reefs are very productive areas for extremely valuable snapper and grouper stocks. And so defining those habitat extents for fishery resource assessments is a critical priority for both the state of Florida and the Southeast Fisheries Science Center with NOAA Fisheries. Next slide. And as we are asked to do more habitat mapping work, we are finding that we are coming up against challenges that are holding us back from improving the delineation and characterization classification of habitats. Stakeholders are expecting our habitat maps to be produced at ever higher resolution, at broader extents, and at richer detail, that richer taxonomy and classification labels. And so I want to talk about 3 areas here that our team is working on that are helping us to overcome these challenges. That includes the improvement in standards and practices for the acquisition of multi-beam echosounder surveys, hydrographic surveys that are producing backscatter, how we can ensure a balanced distribution of ground truthing observations to inform predictive habitat models. And then in order to achieve these goals of greater extents and richer detail, higher resolution, it's going to call for more ground truthing. And that can best be supported by things like uncrewed systems. And so I'll cover how we're incorporating those tools. Next slide. Yeah, so backscatter. It's been a standard and a requirement of the hydrographic specs, hydrographic survey specifications and deliverables if you conduct either internal or contracted work for NOAA. It's been in the HSSD documents for years, but getting towards those requirements was not well characterized or well described. And so we formed a group with members of the Coast Survey Office to determine the good practices, what we're calling here, soon to be called best practices. We've found through our work that backscatter can contribute up to 25% in the predictive power of predictive habitat models. And as you can see here on the right, we have an example of backscatter that was collected that we would consider poor, made better through significant and laborious efforts of retuning and reprocessing the backscatter, a significant manual labor to do that work. Bad data results in bad models, and bad models can contribute to bad decisions, and we definitely don't want that. So we identified 7 good practices for acquisition that could lead to and ensuring backscatter that is free from artifacts that can be contributed to either motion of the ship, sea surface conditions, or the performance of the echo sounder. And the first one is set it and forget it. So we know that there's ways of setting setting multi-beam echo sounders to auto to cover a wide depth range over a wide spatial extent. But we think that many echo sounders can be set at a single parameter set, and that can be accomplished over a large survey domain. And that can also reduce the amount of artifacts that can be caused by either changes in pulse configuration or frequency. We know that some systems can be tuned so that they maximize the detection at range and depth for bathymetry, but that can result in signal saturation and attenuation. Line orientation, this may surprise you, that line orientation can have a significant impact on how the backscatter is realized based on the seabed sonification. Diving a little bit into the weeds here, steering the beams of a multi-beam can result in a error in the normalization of backscatter. And we all know that bad weather, bad sea conditions can affect the quality of your bathymetry. It does the same to backscatter. So try to reduce speeds in those conditions, or just choose to survey on another day. Surveys now are being conducted on multiple platforms, whether it be multiple vessels or autonomous underwater systems or surface vessels. There are ways that we recommend calibrating or normalizing across those platforms in order to produce a consistent mosaic across the survey domain. And please review your data regularly. It's really challenging to fix bad backscatter in post-processing. It's really easy to correct it with minor changes in the acquisition while you're conducting your survey. And these practices are already available as a one-pager that we're actually delivering to contractors within NOAA and within our field units within NOAA Coast Survey. And they'll soon be available as an appendix in the hydrographic survey inspection deliverables or in the field procedures manual. Next slide. Producing predictive habitat models is dependent upon a broad and balanced distribution of ground truthing observations. And we've been conducting a number of simulations that are distributing those ground truthing observations, considering the feature space. This can be acoustic backscatter, other environmental drivers that can determine the distribution of habitat types, complexity metrics that we derive from bathymetry and elevation models. All of this is grounded by the modeling framework that's being used in the resulting classification scheme. We've been conducting a number of simulations throughout our research areas, such as the Great Lakes, the Pacific Coast, and in the Gulf of Mexico, and are currently adopting something called the condition Latin hypercube, which is a feature space driven sampling scheme that allows us to distribute a given number of sampling locations across a domain, equally distributing them across the feature space, and now incorporating also a multitude of platforms such as uncrewed systems and drop cameras. Next slide. And lastly, these high resolution habitat models that are at broader extents are requiring us to conduct ground truthing at an ever increasing extent and number of samples. And in order to achieve this, we've got to move to uncrewed systems. We're incorporating several micro AUVs that are shown here in the bottom left that are helping us collect high resolution synthetic aperture sonar imagery of the seabed, as well as imagery of the seabed that is increasing our image library by several orders of magnitude. We can only classify and interpret those images using AI and machine learning tools, which are requiring us to develop elaborate libraries and image sets. And I encourage us that are working in these areas, especially in Florida, where we are encountering similar benthic types and ecosystems, and suggest that we work together to develop this library together and build off of each other, leverage each other's resources. Next slide. Thanks again for the time in this group. Sorry I can't be there in person. Wish I could be there, especially for the after hours. I know a lot of great ideas will come forward with some beverages in hand. Left-hand QR code here, you can scan and learn more about NCOS habitat mapping in our latest strategic plan. And on the QR code on the right, you can scan and visit the digital atlas, which will be updated in the coming weeks with the latest version and with some new great remotely sensed data and direct observations of the Florida coral reef tract. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And since it's going to be difficult to have you participate in the panel, I think it's too interactive. We do have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So if anybody has a question for Chris, I'd go ahead and Renee will hand you a microphone. Any questions in the audience? We got one from Jeff Danielson coming, Chris.
Testing. Okay. Hey, Chris, great talk. Question for you regarding your atlas. You mentioned 52 remote sensing data sets are in the viewer. Are those data sets strictly pointing back to like Digital Coast, NOAA NCI, and other systems, or are those added value data sets beyond what's in those government portals? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a combination, Jeff. Thanks for the question. It's a combination, and actually only one points to an existing and outward publicly available set, and that's the Unified Reef Map. All the other data sets have been accumulated, and restacked in a geodatabase that has been re-imaged and reimagined through this digital atlas. The geodatabase points to the original data sets as well, and then in addition to the original remote sensing, the digital elevation models and the backscatter layers that exist, we also add some complexity metrics, slope, derivatives of slope, and a principal components analysis that we've conducted that provides us with initial feeds into our segmentation and classification algorithms for some of our habitat mapping routines, as well as backscatter. And then some of the images aren't available publicly. The direct observations that we're incorporating as ground truth images and benthic images. Some of those are not available in other means publicly, but are available through our archive, through the geodatabase, and through this digital atlas.
Great, thank you, Chris. I think we'll move on at this point. Appreciate your time. Wish you could be here with us. Okay, our next speakers are also virtual. We have a couple people, it's kind of a tag team. It's Mark Finkbeiner and Kate Rose from NOAA. Mark will speak about why you should be using the Coastal and Marine Ecological Classification Standard, or CMEX. And then Kate will follow on with CMEX Made Easier, revisions, and new resources. Take it away, Noah.
All right, thanks, Gerald. Mark Finkbeiner here, and I will promise this will not be too hard of a sales pitch on CMEX. But that being said, I think there's a number of aspects of the system that really make it attractive as a classification framework for the mapping that you guys are talking about. And I also want to acknowledge Monique LaFrance Bartley, who actually would be doing this presentation, but unfortunately has a conflict. So I'm standing in for her, and she'll be there to follow up with any questions you might have if you want to get into the details. Next slide. So just real quickly, I thought it would be a good way to tee up Kate's half of this presentation with a little bit of a CMEX 101 for anyone that isn't already familiar with the standard, and beginning initially with where we intend this standard to be applied. So the domain for this system really ends at the splash zone on the exposed marine coasts. And then as you head into the estuaries, the head of tide is where the CMEX domain stops. And that in some cases goes as far inland as Albany, New York, if you think of the Hudson River. And then seaward to the deep ocean. So certainly applicable across all the geographies we've been looking at this morning in terms of the priorities. Next slide. So CMEX really can be considered a classification system that integrates a series of sub-classification systems, and we have 4 major components that address the water column, the physical and chemical aspects of the water column, the biota, and that includes things that are attached to the benthos and things that are suspended. We don't include the nekton, so if animals or organisms are capable of leaving an observation within, let's say, a minute or so, those are not considered part of the system. Substrate, of course, it's very foundational, and that we are leveraging the Whitworth and the Folk classification systems there. And then the geoform is the structural geomorphology of the seafloor, not the geology, but really just the shape and the configuration of the seafloor. Biogeographic setting and aquatic setting provide geographic context to the components. Aquatic setting is based on tidal location in the tidal regime, and then the biogeographic setting is based on Spalding's marine ecosystems of the world. And any of these settings or components can be described further using a set of modifiers. We have a long list of modifiers that include things like energy, rugosity, percent cover, things like that. And then ultimately what you have, if you have information from all these pieces, is what would be called a biotope. And that is a standard repeatable combination of living organic organisms and their abiotic settings and context. Next question, next slide. So what are the advantages? And on the left, what you see there are some of the arguments that we made years and years ago when we were seeking to get FGDC to endorse CMEX as a national classification standard. And those bullets really sort of describe the fact that traditionally benthic mapping has been done at relatively small scales by small groups, and oftentimes working with one or two particular pieces of technology, and that there really hasn't been a unifying classification framework that can be applied on large geographic scales or on across a diversity of habitats. So what that results in is a very fragmented data and information landscape. As you start to integrate all these small studies into larger pictures, you start to see how the differences in how the way the data was collected or organized start to work against you in being able to get a really good, clear picture. So that was one of the impetuses for creating CMEX, and hopefully what we have on the right side are the things that now make it advantageous for a variety of users, but in particular this group. So it does include the meaningful ecological elements that would be necessary to understand habitat in the deeper sense. We made a real strong effort to make sure that it was technology agnostic, and I'll show you an example of that. Again, applicable at a variety of scales, and it is a dynamic standard, so we recognize that it needs continual update based on what the science is telling us and feedback from our users as they actually apply it to data. So what that hopefully allows you to do is optimize your ability to integrate data coming from a variety of sources at different scales. Next slide. Okay, as a case study, this is Monique's work. She did this project in support of the National Park Service. Post-Hurricane Sandy, the Park Service funded 4 projects in the Northeast to look at the impacts of the storm. And Monique at the time was with the University of Rhode Island, and they did this work for the Fire Island National Seashore. So in this case, the focus of the project particularly was on a new inlet that had formed. There you see the East Breach over there in that little map. And the project was intended to essentially establish a baseline to look at how Great South Bay might be influenced by this new flushing regime that would be a result of that new inlet. And there were a couple of other CMEX related goals, because this was a little bit of a pilot of the standard itself. And one was to provide an example of a variety of data in a comprehensive way and see how well CMEX performed. Demonstrate whatever utility and value it might have. And then, of course, this was a chance to get some feedback as to what might be improved. Some of the key outcomes was that it was helpful for including different types of biological data, and that looking at this study and the other three Park Service studies, it did show value in terms of being able to look at those in a more comprehensive way. And there's a report there that Monique put together in terms of the summary of the work at Fire Island, and you got a little bit of a hyperlink down there if you want to read more detail. So next slide. So a quick rundown, we were talking about technology agnostic. So this is an example of how that played out in Fire Island. So there were three sort of large data streams coming into that project. One was remote sensing based. The LiDAR, the topobathy LiDAR was used. URI collected its own multi-beam echo sounder data and interferometric side scan data. So they had good bathymetry and good backscatter coming into that. Moving a little further down in the spatial scale, there was drop camera and towed video for a large number of observations that took place in the seashore. The aerial imagery in this case was actually used as a planning tool for the video drops. So we weren't really interpreting necessarily here, but that was sort of a framework for planning the in situ work. And wherever the video was taken, there was a grab sample also taken. And then as you look in the lower half of that table, you can see how each of those technologies was able to contribute to the geoform, substrate, biotic, and modifiers parts of CMEX. So the good news here is that these technologies really work and contribute to CMEX, whether you're working with a sediment grain size analysis and a grab, or whether you're looking at broader remotely sensed data products like backscatter and multi-beam. And next slide. So this is where this gets you if you have that information from those different settings and components. And this is a preliminary biotope map that's been done for, in this case, sunken forest, this little portion of the study area. And I would say preliminary here in this case, because we have sediment, we have biota, and we have geoform, but we do not have the water column. So that would be the final piece that would be necessary to really call this a classic biotope, the way it's been referenced by Connor and others. And that may be a little difficult to read, but if you look at that pink polygon, that's a Maya lateralis and nematodes within a sediment wave field of medium sand in a washover band flat. So you've got all that environmental information in one descriptive unit. Next slide. And then that's great. But then what Monique was able to do was take that information and actually establish some ecological value. So the simple method behind what you see here is that they took seagrass as a high priority habitat of conservation value and then integrated it with gemma occurrences, which were a known waterfowl food source to give you what might be ecological areas of particular interest. Next slide. And I think that's it. I'll thank everyone and forego questions in the interest of time and let Kate take the rest of the story.
Hey, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, great. Yeah, so Mark just showed that great example of how CMEX was used in New York, but we know that CMEX is also used all over the US, including Florida, obviously. And so we wanted to also make people aware of the changes that we're making to both the CMEX content and also the format and ways that we hope make it easier for people to use. Next slide, please. So, CMEX, as Mark mentioned, was endorsed and published by the FGDC in support of U.S. national spatial data infrastructure strategies. And this, he mentioned all those benefits and the rationale for doing so. And so a lot of these were sort of discussed over the years as these policies were being developed. And so the CMEX benefits, such as providing a common language for interpreting data, enabling consistency and compatibility and interoperability, that all leads to facilitating the sharing and the use of data and services, were what led the FGDC to want to endorse it and name it as a national standard. And as Mark mentioned, CMEX is designed to be updated as needed, and so that they remain relevant over their life cycle. And so for CMEX, this means being responsive to the evolving needs of the scientific and coastal communities, being able to incorporate new scientific information and discoveries, and to accommodate new technologies. And so, for instance, the work that Mark just showed, that one slide, a few of those data types, such as imagery, backscatter, and so on, weren't really widely used at the time of CMEX's development back then for habitat mapping. So some of the changes that we're making really relate to that. And the FGDC recommends that standards are reviewed every few years. Next slide. So we've recently embarked on a review. We have this dynamic standard process that was set up there's more information about this process on the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information's CMEX webpage. There's a screenshot there on the right with the URL below. And the idea is just to, this allows us to make changes based on CMEX user community feedback. We have a change proposal submission form available there with criteria and guidelines for sending something in. And it's basically just a peer review process, and it's as iterative as necessary. And you can see from the diagram on the right, it's sort of like an idealized process, but it allows for multiple consultations with subject matter experts and, going back to the proposer and so on. And this is all coordinated by the Interagency CMEX Implementation Group. This is a group that's made up of many of the CMEX developers and authors and CMEX power users. And that email is where you can reach us with any questions about this and about using CMEX in general. But basically, the CMEX implementation group wants to make sure that any changes are really well thought through, and that they're vetted by the user community, and that they adhere to the original guiding principles of CMEX. And we want to be as undisruptive as possible so that we don't create extra work for people who have used earlier versions of the classification that way. So next slide. So as we started to work through some of the changes, we realized that we'd also need to move from the legacy formats that are shown over there on the left to a new format and change management systems so that we could track the changes and easily publish new versions and make it easy, most importantly, for users to see what's changed. So CMEX was published as a document in 2012. There's as a 300+ page PDF. Later, the terms and definitions were added to like an access database, which was called the CMEX catalog by NatureServe, who was one of the CMEX development partners. And they also built a web-based tool for browsing and searching the CMEX units. But that was unfortunately decommissioned a couple of years ago. So we ended up transferring that access database into an open source format and adopting FAIR vocabulary principles. And these are all really well described and referenced in this 10 simple rules for making a vocabulary FAIR publication. And I think it was great that Anna went through all the benefits of FAIR, so I won't get into that earlier. And so although this really kind of focuses on vocabularies for use in metadata and data management and discovery, one of the definable steps is that each term needs to be denoted by a persistent unique web identifier, a URL basically, which will return a machine and human readable representation of that concept. So this is really great for discoverability, but it also enables all sorts of ways for CMEX to be used in sort of access tools and automated processing. So it's kind of a win-win there. Next slide, please. And so then to access all of this, we have some new resources that are in development. We're managing the versions of the vocabulary in a Git repository, which is hosted by NOAA. And as I said, allows us to easily make and track changes at a very granular level. The public-facing GitHub is where releases of the versions will be able to be accessed with change notes and other useful information there. And those releases will also be issued DOIs so that it's easier for people to reference that version in their work. And so the GitHub is up now, but it's still, in development, so things are changing all the time. And we're also building a new version of the CMEX Catalog Explorer, and that's going to be a much more easier, user-friendly way for people to browse and search for terms and compare between versions. So next slide. We're moving on to the content updates. As I said, we had this sort of ideal process laid out. And so even though we knew from feedback, dealing and answering questions from people about CMAX over the years, that there were areas that definitely needed improvements. We hadn't really received any formal proposals to address them. So we decided to be really proactive and try a different approach. And this arrow graphic shows in the blue what we've accomplished so far for the substrate component. This is where the furthest along. And so we set up some work groups and we held a series of virtual meetings, and we used those meetings to discuss issues and develop solutions. And then we sent proposed changes out to a wider group of reviewers, and the feedback that we got from them helped us to fine tune the guidance and sort of catch errors that we'd made. And then the implementation group made the final decision on whether to accept or reject the changes. And now at this stage, we've released interim materials, and these are the final and approved versions of the substrate component that are available on the GitHub site, downloadable for people who want to start using them immediately. There's a spreadsheet version, some comparison tables, and the source document of the units and definitions and implementation guidance. And then the final products, which is the gray arrow there, are still in progress. We're working on a substrate component work group report, which will give like a bit more context for the changes in the process. And then we'll release a new version of CMAX, the full classification with all of the changes on GitHub, and also link to it from our CMAX web pages. And so the most substantial issues raised by the work group for the substrate component were relating to interpreting and classifying substrate from video and still images or backscatter data. And as mentioned, these are much more widely used today, and there are improved systems and increased data resolution. But what we were hearing from people was that the size and the mixed categories in the upper level substrate units didn't really work well for these types of data. So we made some changes to the thresholds and groupings that result in what we find to be ecologically relevant habitat classifications, where you can actually call out grain particle sizes of gravel, which is a very important habitat for fisheries and so forth. And at the lower level, at the subgroup, which is the lowest level of the classification, as Mark mentioned, uses the Wentworth and Folk substrate classifications, and those remain unchanged, so that that's sort of like the foundation of the substrate classification there. Next slide, please. And so for the biotic component update, you can see a lot of gray arrows there, but we've actually done a tremendous amount of work. We had multiple discussion groups going, and we started out reviewing the faunal bed class. And because in some cases it was unclear to people how to determine dominance when you were dealing with infauna versus epifauna, or whether the fauna was partially buried. So we ended up creating a new subbenthic biota setting and replaced the faunal bed with epifaunal biota and infaunal biota classes. And then we reviewed Carl's units to update any changes in taxonomy and work out their placement in the revised hierarchy. We've also conducted that same sort of review with National Vegetation Alliance units that make up the CMAX wetland emergent class, just to make sure that we're in alignment with that classification as well. And that work is coming along, and I think we're kind of on the verge of being able to send this stuff out for a wider review, peer review again already. And then we'll go through the same steps that we did with the substrate component. Next slide, please. And so for the geoform component, we really only got started and had a couple of discussions with a work group there, and then we basically had to put this kind of on hold while we caught up with the work from the other component reviews that we were doing, because we were just kind of falling behind. So we've kind of put that on hold. So we will reconvene when we've gotten to a better place with those. But the initial feedback that we got for the geoform is that the framework is pretty good. We do know that we need to review and add more units as needed, probably revise some definitions of existing units, perhaps to include more succinct definition or descriptions of morphology. And things like that, and to also look at other ways that we can facilitate application with automated object identification and image segmentation, sort of processing tools and workflows that are being used now. So next slide, please. And so finally, just if you would like to stay informed on any of this, up there again, I have the CMAX implementation group's email address. Again, we take questions about the updates or implementation of any sort. We put out a newsletter every now and then, so if you'd like to sign up for that, just drop us a line and let us know about that. And we have 2 web pages. One was with the on the IOCM team's website. We have a dedicated page there for CMEX, and that kind of focuses on giving examples and implementation and technical guidance for CMEX. And then we have another webpage that I mentioned already on the NCEI website. And that really kind of focuses more on the vocabulary management side of CMEX there. But on both of those pages, there is a link to our CMEX in Action map viewer, which is really just supposed to be a very informational, kind of like a little map viewer with points on the map for where we know that there are projects of people where CMEX has been applied. And then, it's kind of like searchable. You can filter out by, if you were looking for who's applied like the biota component or something like that. And with pop-ups that kind of link you back to resources for those pages. And so we do that because, people always are asking how other people have applied CMEX. And so we're really just kind of providing this sort of like visual bibliography for you to go and like look into things like that. And so I'm bringing this up because we have a few projects in Florida. Some of them are like kind of dated. Probably the CSCAMP work on the West Florida Escarpment is the most recent one that we have. But just to say, if you are using CMEX in Florida and would like to submit your project information, we'd be really happy to add that to the map. Just drop us a line and let us know. That's it. Thank you.
Time for questions. So we're going to go ahead and move on. Coming a little bit closer to home, our next presentation will be on Tampa Bay modeling, and our presenter is Chin Jen from USF College of Marine Science.
Last slide. I don't. Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about the Tampa Bay Coastal Ocean Model Nowcast Forecast System and its applications. So I can. Yeah. So Tampa Bay is influenced by the adjacent Gulf of Mexico and what occurred within the bay itself. So in order to study the coastal ocean process in the Tampa Bay area, we built a Tampa TBCON that includes Tampa Bay Coastal Ocean Model, that includes the Tampa Bay Sarasota Bay and the intercoastal waterway and all the inlets. The TBCON's open boundary is derived from the WCON, West of Florida Coastal Ocean Model, also maintained by our lab. So in this way, we can downscale from the deep ocean across the continental shelf and into the bay. So this figure shows the TBCON model grade. Within the bay, the resolution could be as high as 20 meters. And this figure shows the model grade of WFCON. Next slide, please. So TBCON is a daily nowcast forecast system. We have several products available online every day. We have the sea level projection and the comparison at the tide gauge locations. And we also have the surface current sea level in different regions. And we also collaborate with the FWC to do the red tide prediction. And when there is a kind of like wastewater leakage or the oil spill in the Tampa Bay area, we also do the tracer to predict where the pollutant plume will be. So we also have the case of the Piney Point wastewater disaster. And we also have the emergent map of the Tampa Bay. They're also available online every day. Next slide, please. So I don't have time to go through all the products, but I will just go through some as a case. And so first one is a navigation spot. Every day we have the prediction of the water level projection and comparison with the near real-time data around the Tampa Bay area in those high gauges. So every day, TBCom provides 1 day hindcast and 3.5 day forecast. And then the high gauge data is automatically outdated every hour. And this figure shows the comparison between the observation in blue and TBCom simulation in red, and then the pure tidal prediction. So we can see the observation and the model simulation pretty well, and they are different from the purely tidal prediction. So that means we really need a circulation model to predict sea level, not just use the tidal constituent to calculate this kind of thing. Next slide, please. So here is the second product, the surface current and the sea level. The color coding represent the sea level, and the arrows represent the surface current. This is the case of Hurricane Ian. So during the Hurricane Ian, the TBCom successfully forecast the extreme set down driving by the hurricane. And if we focus on this area near the coast, we can see sometimes they are white. That means during this period of time, at this point, it is totally dry. So the water pushed out of the bay by the hurricane. So during this period of time, during Hurricane Ian, NOAA's operation model in the Tampa Bay area crashed because of the extremely lower water level. So TBCom result is requested by the coastal navigation manager of NOAA this area, and share with the Coast Guard sector St. Petersburg for their reference to do their search and rescue operation. Next slide, please. So here are the comparison of water level simulated and observed during the Hurricane Ian. Those are all archive data, archive figures. So from the September 26, 27 until September 30. So again, the blue observation in blue and red by the model simulation. We can see that TBCom successfully predict the water level set down a couple days in ahead. And next slide, please. This is another station, Opal Tampa. Again, the archive. These are all archive figure. We didn't fine tune, and it's these things are all the product when it happens. So again, they agree with each other pretty well. And then if we focus on this, September 29, this is when the hurricane really affect the Tampa Bay area. We can see the flat line here, and also in the observation in blue, we can see a jump of the data. That's because during this period of time, it is dry at that point, and then the sensor, the target sensor, cannot get any reasonable data because it is dry. So the sensor cannot get a water level data. We keep it here because these are all archive figure. So yeah, the water is really dry over there. And next slide, please. So here, continue. So here are figures shared by team. During the hurricane, we can see that it is really dry. And then next, yeah, the other one, and yeah, another one. So go back, yeah. So you can see somebody here. So we can see the water level really set down for maybe 1 point something, at least 2 meters. Yeah. Next slide, please. So now we know the water level is pretty good. Next, we will show some comparison of the current in the polymality ADCV station in this point. So we have the near surface, middle, and near bottom there. Observe current and TBCom simulated current. We can and they agree with each other pretty well. And we also do the statistic analysis for the correlate coefficient and the angle deviation, and then compare the magnitude, and then they are all pretty good. So Perhaps one of the most unique feature in the S3 is the two-layer S3 circulation that when you average the along channel velocity over a period of time, we can see that the current flow out of the bay at the top and then flow into the bay at the bottom there. So again, we average this along shipping channel velocity over a period of time. And then by both for the observation and the model simulation, we can see the model simulation in the triangle, blue triangle, and then the square the observation. We can see they agree with each other pretty well. And if we focus on this about 6 meters area, we can see it. Our model successfully predict the turning point where the current velocity is around 6 meter. Okay, next slide. So now we know the model performance is pretty well. We use this to study the hydrodynamics response to the barometric change in the Tampa Bay area. So this is a collaboration between the COMET and the NOAA colleague, and already published in the Deeper Sea Research Part 2. Next slide, please. So basically, we use the so this figure is the bathymetry of Tampa Bay area, and we use the original bathymetry data, and then the one B is the synthetic bathymetry data, and then C shows the difference between these two sets of bathymetry data in this area. So, and then I also want to point out this specific area along Bayou, almost no big change in the bathymetry. We will go back to this later. Okay, next slide, please. So basically, this shows the velocity difference between two experiments. One with the original bathymetric data, and the other one with the synthetic bathymetry data. So A shows the 1 month mean dip average velocity in this area, and B is the difference between the original experiment and the one with the synthetic bathymetry. We can see the difference of 1 month mean dip average velocity between these two experiments, and the C is just the magnitude of the errors in this figure B. We can see a relatively large change in the area with the synthetic bathymetry, especially when there are narrow channels and then tidal inlets. And so this demonstrates it is important to have a correct bathymetry in the coastal ocean model. Next slide, please. So this figure is the same as the last one, but for the whole Tampa Bay area. So we can see that from here, we can see here and here, we can see the local change really propagate throughout the bay, not just influence the local velocity. Yeah. Next slide, please. So this one shows the water level difference between the two experiments at March 1st, 2018. So the color coding shows the water level increase or decrease. So the red is water level increase, and then blue is water level decrease when the bathymetry change. So we can see a large change in the area with the synthetic bathymetry, this area. And then we also can see the bathymetry, the water level change due to the bathymetry change can propagate throughout the bay. And depends on the location, this instantaneous water level may be increase or decrease, and it also change with time. Next slide, please. So, so one of the most important feature in the coastal area is tide. And then for the Tampa Bay area, the most important tide is M2. So here we compare the M2 tide amplitude and phase for these two experiments. One with the original bathymetry, the other with the synthetic bathymetry. So for A, B, C is the original and a synthetic experiment, tidal amplitude, and then C is different between them. D and E is the tidal phase, and F is the difference between them, the phase, different phase between these two experiments. So we can see no obvious change in the open water, and then this long bayou, I talked about that before. Although we don't see the big change in the bathymetry, we almost see the biggest amplitude and the phase change in this area. So yeah. So this is because that means the bathymetry, although no change in bathymetry, but it can be affected by the downstream or upstream. Yeah. So, and then because of the bathymetry impact the hydraulic jack in this area, and that will influence the propagation of the tide. Next slide. Again, this one is the same as the last slide, but for the whole bay. So we can see the shallow bathymetry in the synthetic data area cause the weaker of the tide, and this tidal amplitude will be decreased around the bay for about 1 centimeter, and the tidal phase change also quite uniform throughout the bay, about 5 degrees. Next slide, please. So we also calculate the complex distance of M2 tide change point by point around the bay, and then we calculate distance based on the phase and amplitude of point by point of these two experiments. We can see that in the area with the new bathymetry, synthetic bathymetry, we can see a big change in the complex distance, and then also around the bay, the magnitude of change is small, but it's still change is about 0.5 to 0.6 centimeter. Right, please. Okay, so since the low elevation of the Tampa Bay area, this area is easily to be influenced by the inundation caused by the hurricane or something like king tide. So in order to study this kind of flooding events, we extend our TB-Con model grade to land and form the TB-Con flooding model. The total grade of new model is here. Next slide, please. So we use this model to simulate the Hurricane Idalia storm surge in the Tampa Bay area. Again, the comparison between the model's simulation of vision data around the tide gauge in the Tampa Bay area. Again, they agree with each other pretty well. And Hurricane Idalia caused a storm surge about 1.4 to 1.8 meter around the Tampa Bay area. Next slide, please. So although Hurricane Idalia didn't directly attack the Tampa Bay area, so we are kind of lucky to didn't affect too much by the wind of this Category 3 storm, but the storm surge still affect the low-lying community around the Tampa Bay area. This figure shows the storm surge driven mainly by the Idalia during the peak of the storm surge. And then color coding means the storm surge, the height of storm surge compared with relative to the mean sea level. And then I make this color coding transparent, so we can see that this area around the old Tampa Bay area, and the Gandhi area, and then near the St. Pete downtown and the Gulf beaches, they are flooded during this hurricane event. Next slide, please. So this is another way to present it. This time I use the water level relative to the land surface or the inundation. So the color coding means if they are 3 meters, means during the storm surge, there are 3 meters of water on top of this point. So here is the area around the Hillsborough Bay. And then are they correct? Yes, we have the picture here from that shows the Bayshore Boulevard in this area, and this is the Tampa General Hospital, and you can see this bridge bridge here. So this area will flood during a period of time. And this one is it's near the St. Pete downtown, the Coffee Pot Boulevard. So somebody just paddling down the Coffee Pot Boulevard during the hurricane. Next slide, please. So summary. So TBCon offers an ultimate daily nowcast forecast of coastal variable, providing environmental and navigation support for the Tampa Bay region. The robustness of the TBCon simulation is demonstrated using observation. Such a high-resolution three-dimensional circulation model is a request to simulate complex S3 process as occurred in Tampa Bay. Accurate bathymetry is essential for the coastal modeling application, just such as what we saw storm surge and then the flooding. Yeah, flooding, we also need not just bathymetry, but we also need the correct topography data. And TBCon product shows many motivation for future application of the societal importance. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
All right, last but not least, this will be the final speaker of this session, and then stick around because we are going to do a relatively brief panel discussion at that time. If anyone in the audience has questions for the panel members or the people from NOAA, the different groups of NOAA who presented online, they would be able to unmute and answer any questions. So just keep that in mind. So our next speaker is going to be talking about Keys LiDAR data collection, filling in the gaps and extending to deeper water, presented by David Cohn with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. David?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for sticking around. Mine's going to be a little bit shorter, but I'm going to be talking about one of the end products of all this mapping effort and just how all these different maps can come together and be used by people on the ground. Let me see if I can get it to work. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to give a brief history of the reef map. I'm going to talk about how we're going to prioritize updates to the reef map, some of the updates that we're going to do, a little bit about the interpretation and analysis, and then just the future of the unified reef map. Next slide, please. So the Unified Reef Map is a product that's been developed over many, many years, bringing together a ton of different data sets. The first version of this reef map came out in 2013. Version 2.0, and I think we're now up at 2.1, was published in 2017. And it really is this aggregation of mapping products from throughout the region. And it's not just coral reefs. We've got a lot of seagrass information in there, but we do have a lot of gaps, and a lot of this data is older. And so there's a lot of room for improvement. Although I did use this a lot during my PhD, and it was perfect every time. So it's pretty good. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of the metadata that we got, that we put together for these maps. As you see, these maps don't automatically talk to one another. They've got different minimum mapping units. There are different types of imagery, from LiDAR to aerial imagery, side scan, satellite. It was a lot of effort to bring all this together, different scales. And what we really wanted to do was just to have a